The story begins on an ordinary morning when a young man wakes up excited after realizing that his order has finally arrived. As soon as he opens the door, he finds the package and believes that inside is the Hell 4 console he had been waiting for so eagerly. His name is Ren Suo, a young man who grew up healthy, with good values and more than enough energy to spend every day. Like many people, he had always dreamed of having a console so he could play however he wanted, whenever he wanted. Now, in his final year of university, he lives in Lianjiang, renting his uncle's house for a low price. Since he still has a few months before graduating and starting work, he decides to use the little money he earned during his internship to buy a Hell 4 from an online store, planning to make the most of his free time by playing a lot and trying out the big releases. But as soon as he opens the box, he realizes that something is very strange. He picks up the object inside the package and notices that it looks nothing like the console he bought. As soon as he turns one of the device's parts, a mysterious smoke begins to come out, making the protagonist think that they really went overboard with the packaging just to create a dramatic effect. Coughing because of the smoke, he complains that those people must have had nothing better to do and takes a closer look at the item in his hands, concluding that it is definitely not a Hell 4. Rensuo tries to open the device, but not even his fingernail can fit into the cracks. Completely confused, he decides to contact Hell Games customer support, where the support agent checks the order and explains that because of an error involving a coupon used in the purchase, the system ended up registering the product as a Hell 4 Pro, and the Lianjiang store sent that version directly to him. Ren Suo is confused when he hears that this thing is supposed to be a Hell 4 Pro, but the support agent says that he can still return the product within 7 days, although he will lose the original coupon and receive only another discount as compensation. The protagonist replies that he will test it first and return it later if he does not like it. The support agent says that there is no problem since he can return it within the deadline, and once the product is received, Hell Games will automatically send him a new coupon. The agent also asks that if he likes the product, he take a few photos and leave a 5-star review. Even so, the protagonist still finds everything very strange, because that console looks nothing like the official model. Still trying to go along with the idea of testing it, he notices the main problem. The box has no controller, no power input, and no cable to turn it on. Frustrated, Ren Suo concludes that it is nothing more than a huge piece of junk. However, soon after, the doorbell rings again and he receives another package. When he opens it, he realizes that this time it really is the true Hell 4 Pro, which leaves him even more confused about what exactly the strange device that arrived earlier was. The object had no logo, no cables, no controller, and looked like nothing more than a counterfeit brick. Even so, Rensuo admits that the design is actually nice, and that maybe it could serve as decoration. But as soon as he touches the device again, it turns on by itself, startling the protagonist as a voice announces that Small Worlds brings endless fun. Then the television turns on by itself and shows that the Small Worlds game console has detected the Hell 4 Pro controller, recognized the TV, and connected automatically. The interface welcomes Rensuo, saying that Small Worlds offers endless fun, but warns that this is his first time using the product and asks him to register an account. Rensuo is impressed when he realizes that the console managed to connect wirelessly to both the Hell controller and the television, and he finds it strange that he has never heard of a device like this before. Still suspicious, he looks at the product box, sees that the sender is the Nesser company, and searches for the company's name on his phone, but he finds no reliable information. This only increases his doubts about the console's origin. Even so, he sits down on the sofa and decides to start testing it. Since the sender of the console was the Nesser company, Rensuo decides to use that name as a basis and registers the account as Ren Nesser. He jokes to himself that if he starts receiving spam messages or emails after this, he will know exactly where his data leaked from. As soon as he confirms the registration, the console activates by itself and registers the data of his soul and body, warning that, aside from Ren Nesser, no other information entity will be able to use that product. The interface then recognizes the player Ren Nesser as Level 1, welcomes him to Small Worlds, and the game finally begins. He looks at the interface and admits that it is very beautiful. When he sees two options on the screen, he decides to choose "What should you do now?" first. The interface recommends that Rensuo go to the store and play the free game of the week. He is surprised to realize that there is even a free game, but he imagines that it is probably something simple, like a little box-pushing game. Before downloading anything, he decides to check the store and chooses the search option, but he receives a warning saying that each search costs 10 merits and that he is too poor to use that function. Furious, he realizes that the platform's currency is called merit and complains that if there is a currency like that, the game should at least say where to buy those points. He also thinks that the message is far too brutally honest. With no other choice, Rensuo accesses the free game of the month, and the screen asks whether he wants to download the game Killer. When he sees the name, he finds it strange, because he has never heard of that game before. He imagines that maybe it is some small game made by foreign developers. Since the games Heroic Spirits Warriors 8 and Curse of the Evil Spirit 2, which he had bought for the Hell 4 Pro, were still on the way, he decides to play Killer first and starts the download. The game is presented as an action RPG focused on immersive assassinations, in which the player takes on the role of a modern assassin capable of using fast travel and traveling around the world. The description also explains that this assassin masters all types of firearms and fighting styles, in addition to allowing the player to choose other assassin characters. Then the console interface shows that Rensuo has chosen the free chapter of the month, called Bloodstained Banquet, with 1-star difficulty. Because it is a free chapter with low difficulty, the screen also indicates that exclusive rewards are disabled, since they are only available on difficulties of 2 stars or higher. The protagonist is also warned that he has a little over 14 hours left to play that chapter, and that when the time runs out, it will be automatically deleted. Rensuo is surprised to see that the download finished almost immediately, concluding that it really did seem to be a small game. But he soon notices something strange, since the Small Worlds console apparently connected to the apartment's Wi-Fi by itself. After thinking about it, though, he concludes that this is not that surprising, since the device also managed to connect directly to the Hell 4 controller and the Dami TV without any setup. As soon as the game begins, Rensuo is shocked to realize that it is not a CG cutscene but real gameplay. He observes the lighting, the rain, the buildings, the textures, the rendering, and the character models, becoming impressed by the visual quality. The interface then asks him to define the assassin's appearance. Rensuo concludes that even a game known for cutting-edge graphical performance like Record Horizon might not be able to surpass this. With that, he understands that Killer is definitely not a simple little game, but a true top-tier title. As he explores the options, he is pleased to see that there is a recommended appearance and a recommended character, which saves him a lot of work. The default appearance shows a bald assassin with an intimidating look. That bald assassin everyone knows, whose ability allows him to alter his own flow of time by creating a bullet time effect. The clown assassin also catches his attention, but the interface shows that this character requires 30 merits to unlock. The interface also shows that the demon hunter assassin has the ability Abyssal Wolf Swordsman, but he also requires 30 merits to unlock. The protagonist realizes that the 3 recommended characters have different starting specialties. The bald assassin starts with hand-to-hand combat mastery and firearms mastery. The clown assassin starts with firearms basics and throwing expert, and the demon hunter assassin has only sword master. Among all of them, the bald assassin is the only one recommended for beginners and also the only free option. Since the game will be automatically deleted in 14 hours, Rensuo decides that it is not worth spending money and chooses the bald assassin. Then he adjusts the character's appearance to turn him into someone from Longguo and gives him the simple name Assassin. After confirming his choices, the character appears on a rainy street, and Rensuo realizes that he can finally control him inside the game. As he begins controlling the character, he approaches a drunk man on the street, but the NPC reacts aggressively, asking if that kid is trying to steal his drink. The drunk man tries to attack the protagonist, but he dodges easily, gives him only a light pat on the shoulder, and keeps walking. Right after that, the game interface displays the main mission. Before 8 o'clock at night, he must find a way to enter the Rampalugi banquet on the 8th floor of Blackthorn Tower using a legitimate identity. Then the mission marker points to Blackthorn Tower itself, a huge illuminated building in the middle of the city. It does not take long for the protagonist to reach the tower. At the entrance of Blackthorn Tower, Rensuo sees important guests being received with extremely careful service. The attendants treat a man named Ricard with great attention, saying that there are dry suits and hair dryers upstairs, while others offer to take him to the elevator room. Seeing this, the protagonist thinks the service is far too attentive and realizes that trying to sneak in is practically impossible. When he reaches the reception desk, an attendant asks for his invitation, and the interface presents 4 options. Say that he forgot the invitation at home, pretend to be the manager of a company upstairs, attack directly, or try to bribe her with money. Rensuo quickly analyzes the alternatives. The first option probably will not be useful at all. The second seems to be the conversation route. The third is clearly the combat route, and the fourth seems to be the bribery route. Since the second option does not cost money, he decides to choose it, and the assassin says that he is the manager of one of the companies upstairs and needs to use the elevator to retrieve some documents. The receptionist replies that access is closed until 6 in the evening, and asks him to come back the next day, but Rensuo, controlling the assassin, questions who decided that. The attendant answers that it was decided by the simple fact that the tower belongs to the Rampalugi family, and that alone is reason enough, causing the interface to mark the first attempt as failed. Soon after, recognizing that he has come back again, she calls the guards and tells them to take him somewhere else to cool his head. An older guard approaches and warns him not to cause trouble, but Rensuo starts pressing the controller buttons and goes into action, beating the guards with ease. One of the guards who manages to escape uses the radio, saying that a hostile target has appeared in Parlin Alley, reporting that Terry has been killed and requesting reinforcements immediately. After defeating the guard, the interface offers several options for interacting with the body, allowing him to loot it, drag it, or get rid of it. The protagonist thinks for a moment, but before he can make a decision, he is shocked when he is shot by the guards, who fire at him coldly. After the attempt ends badly, the game automatically returns to the moment when the assassin was still in the alley. The protagonist remembers that, after accidentally making the character kill a guard, he tried the other options one by one to enter Blackthorn Tower through the main entrance, but the result was always failure. When he says he forgot the invitation at home, the attendant asks for his name to check it against the photos, and the mission fails. When he tries to attack directly, she screams for help. The guards appear shooting, and the mission also ends in failure. In the bribery attempt, the assassin tries to act as if he knows the attendant and offers her £5 to make things easier, but the woman calls the other staff members, saying that there is a suspicious person there, making the mission fail again. Frustrated, Rensuo realizes that the 4 entrance options all seem to be dead ends. Even so, he imagines that, in the conversation route, he might be able to infiltrate using the clown assassin's transformation ability. But the problem is that he has no merits to buy that character. Still unwilling to accept it, he even considers that perhaps the mistake in the bribery route was offering too little money, but after trying to go around the back of the tower, he also fails to advance. The emergency exit is protected by men in black, and any stranger who approaches ends up having a gun pointed at his face, with the assassin at most managing to knock one of them down before being riddled with bullets. Even so, after several attempts, Rensuo begins to vaguely understand what the correct infiltration route might be. First, he tries the conversation option again, and after the attendant refuses him entry, he deliberately starts bothering her to attract the guard's attention. As expected, 2 strong guards drag the assassin back into the alley, and his plan is to wait until they walk a certain distance, far enough that the other guards cannot see what happens inside. As soon as he finds the perfect opportunity, he rushes at the 2 guards with absurd speed, managing to knock one of them out, and when the other grabs the radio to call for reinforcements, the assassin grabs him by the neck and knocks him out with ease as well. While playing, Rensuo finds it strange that he only pressed a single button, yet the character carried out an entire sequence of strikes on his own. Immediately afterward, the interface asks whether he wants to disguise himself as a member of Blackthorn Tower's security, and he confirms, taking the guard's uniform. On the first attempt using the uniform, the protagonist tries to enter the tower in disguise, but as soon as he reaches the reception desk, the attendant asks where Terry is. He replies that Terry is in the bathroom and walks past her, saying that he needs to do something inside, but another guard sees through the disguise after noticing that his voice does not sound like Dennis's, and they eliminate the protagonist on the spot, causing the interface to mark the mission as failed. Rensuo then changes the plan and decides to try another approach. First, he takes down the guard in the alley and puts on his uniform. Then, he tries to enter through the back of the tower and targets one of the men in black guarding the exit. This time, using the disguise and the assassin's quick movements, he fights the guards in the alley and advances to the side of the building, taking advantage of the loud noise of the rain and thunder to break a window without drawing attention, finally allowing Rensuo to enter the first floor of Blackthorn Tower without any problems. Disguised as a security guard, he starts walking through the building and soon reaches the men in black, who question what he is doing there. To maintain the lie, he says that he ran into a lunatic earlier, got his clothes dirty, and needs to go upstairs to change, and the leader of the men in black accepts the explanation and allows him to pass. With that, Rensuo celebrates when he realizes that his guess was right. The attendants and the regular security guards know one another, so even while wearing the uniform, the assassin could still be exposed by his voice. But those men in black clearly are not close to the security team and belong to another group inside the tower. He understands that the attendants and regular security guards are probably employees of Blackthorn Tower itself, while the men in black, being very well equipped, seem to be high-level bodyguards temporarily hired only to reinforce the banquet's security, leading him to conclude that, from this point on, a confrontation with those men in black will probably be inevitable. After throwing the men in black off his trail, Rensuo manages to change back into the suit and discreetly enters the Rampalugi banquet hall, and the interface records that he entered the event under the identity of an unknown stranger and creates a save file. Right after that, the main mission appears again. Before 8 o'clock at night, he must search for lethal weapons at the banquet and mark anyone suspicious. Rensuo is surprised to realize that the mission is very open-ended, and when he looks at the time, he sees that it is already 7:48 in the evening, with the game's time passing at the same speed as the real world, meaning he has just over 10 minutes to find weapons and identify suspects. The protagonist finds the situation strange, wondering what kind of weapon could exist at a banquet, but when he observes the table, the interface identifies only simple items such as a silver fork and a dinner knife, both with low damage and capable of being thrown. While searching more carefully, a man acting suspiciously approaches him, but when Rensuo turns around, the man tries to play it off. And at that moment, firearms mastery is activated, revealing that the man is carrying a P-19C automatic pistol and marking both the location of the weapon and the position of that suspicious individual. Rensuo then understands that searching for weapons and searching for suspects is practically the same thing, since the suspicious people are precisely the ones carrying the weapons he needs to find. When the man turns his back, the theft option appears on the screen with a 7-second time limit, and Rensuo realizes that the game wants him to take advantage of that opening to take the weapon from the target without being noticed. But the target keeps walking through the hall, so he decides to follow him for the time being and wait until he stands still for a few seconds, only for the man in black to notice the pursuit, turn around, and ask why he is following his footsteps. And when he moves toward Rensuo in the middle of the banquet, the commotion ends up causing a woman to spill wine on herself. She also spills wine on a mustached man, complains about the protagonist's lack of manners, and asks how someone like him managed to be invited to the Rampalugi banquet. Seeing the NPC's reaction, Rensuo starts to break out in a cold sweat and thinks that they are far too realistic, wondering whether this is real-time rendering since the Small Worlds console seems far too powerful, until he realizes that if the game offers this much freedom, he does not need to wait for the target to stand still and lower his guard on his own, and only has to create an opening by himself. Taking advantage of the confusion in the hall, the protagonist bumps into a blonde man and makes wine spill everywhere, also hitting another guest and forcing everyone around them to get distracted by apologies, complaints, and confused looks. With this opening deliberately created, Rensuo manages to approach the target and steal the weapon before he notices anything. The interface confirms the theft's success and shows that he obtained a P-19C pistol with 17 bullets, as well as a silencer that still needs to be equipped. But soon after, one of the men in black grabs the assassin from behind and tells him not to move, restricting all his movements. At that moment, firearms mastery is activated and the interface reveals that the enemy is carrying a Beretta 92 pistol, marking both the weapon's location and the position of that suspicious individual. The screen also warns that the assassin is being held hostage by a suspicious person and is in danger, warning that any rash action may cause him to be attacked immediately. The man in black says he does not know who he is, but he noticed that the protagonist discovered the group and even started aiming at them. Then he presses the gun against the back of the assassin's head and warns that if he wants to live a little longer, he had better stop meddling where he should not. Suddenly, a noise appears in the area, and the man in black says that this is the signal for the operation to begin. At that instant, the interface shows the command to counterattack, and Rensuo takes advantage of the right moment, pressing the button without hesitation. Inside the game, the assassin reacts immediately, shoves the man, throws the enemy off balance, and shoots him at point-blank range. At that exact moment, the clock reaches 8 o'clock at night, and the interface reveals the true mission. The mercenary group Cards has launched an attack against the Rampalugi family, and Rensuo must escort the VIP Karen Rampalugi to a safe place. Realizing this, Rensuo is surprised, understanding that this was not an assassination mission but a protection mission. Soon after, the assassin returns to the hall and sees several mercenaries shooting at the guests. But one of them notices his presence and immediately all the enemies begin firing at him. The interface then shows the command to activate skills and Rensuo triggers bullet time. With time slowed down, the trajectories of the shots appear before him, allowing the protagonist to dodge the bullets in slow motion and retaliate with precise shots against the enemies. During the shootout, someone shouts that there is a shooter and tells everyone to find cover. Rensuo gets excited when he realizes that the game really allows him to enter an absurd combat mode, as if he could sweep through several enemies by himself. Using bullet time, the protagonist dodges the shots in slow motion and continues firing back at the armed men. But the interface soon warns that his instinct is insufficient, and the skill ends. Without the effect of bullet time, the assassin is hit by the hail of bullets and dies. The screen shows the message, "You died," leaving Rensuo confused for a moment. Then the interface opens the saved file selection, showing the ally assassin's save and the save from the arrival of the unknown guest. Rensuo loads the second file and understands the mechanic better. He has only 5 instinct points, and maintaining bullet time consumes 1 point per second. In other words, he can only sustain the skill for a maximum of 5 seconds before needing to wait for it to recover. After loading the save and entering the hall again, Rensuo finds it strange when the interface marks 8 suspects at once, even though he has done nothing. In the previous attempt, he had to bump into someone and provoke a reaction for the person to be considered suspicious, so he finds it strange that the game makes things so much easier this time. But he soon realizes that all the marked suspects are people he had already interacted with in the previous attempt. He then understands that whenever he loads a save, the character's progress is not completely reset. Instead, the information discovered before continues to be carried into the next cycle as already acquired knowledge. In this new attempt, the protagonist avoids the enemy's field of vision and manages to pick up a weapon safely. The interface confirms that he obtained a Beretta 92 with 15 bullets and a silencer. While waiting for 8 o'clock to arrive, Rensuo deliberately passes near some people and identifies a few more suspicious individuals. After observing the hall more carefully, he finds a good cover point for the confrontation and decides to use a simple strategy: 5 seconds shooting with bullet time and 5 seconds resting while his instinct recovers. When the in-game clock reaches 8 o'clock at night, gunshots begin echoing through the hall and the battle truly begins. At that moment, Rensuo recognizes the first shot coming from the next room, exactly like in the previous attempt. The blonde man says that this is the signal to act and draws his pistol, while the protagonist simply watches. But suddenly the man is gunned down and the assassin, with absurd precision, eliminates not only him but also several other enemies scattered throughout the hall. However, the mercenaries soon begin firing back, trying to hit him, and forcing the protagonist to hide. Suddenly, the men in black appear, shouting that the hall is under attack and calling for reinforcements over the radio. But when they enter the banquet hall, they are also taken down in the blink of an eye. Rensuo is confused because he expected a pistol shootout, but suddenly the enemies also appear using assault rifles. Looking more carefully, he realizes that the assassins were taking extra magazines from under the tables, which means they had already hidden the rifles there before the attack began. Taking advantage of the moment when one of them reloads, the protagonist decides to eliminate the pistol-wielding enemy first, since he has weaker firepower, and begins firing back in the middle of the shootout. However, soon one of the bandits starts firing a burst of shots at the place where he was hiding. Seeing that he is about to be hit, Rensuo freezes for an instant. Before he can do anything, 2 enemies move even closer and find a perfect angle to shoot. With that, the assassin is hit by the hail of bullets and dies again. In real life, Rensuo confirms that there really were assault rifles hidden there and complains, not understanding what else the game expected from him in that situation. Then he loads the save again and, using the information he discovered in the previous attempt, enters the hall already locking his aim onto 15 targets at once. In addition, several markers for suspicious weapons also appear on the banquet tables. With firearms mastery activated, the interface reveals the presence of a Steyr AUG assault rifle, and Rensuo realizes that the weapon was hidden right under a table. This time, the protagonist grabs the rifle before the massacre begins and starts shooting with much greater firepower, hitting several enemies in the blink of an eye. Rensuo thinks that, with a weapon like that in hand, the fight basically turns into a massacre. The attackers inside the hall are eliminated quickly, unable to resist for long. Soon after, the security team of the men in black storms the place, and Rensuo, relieved, realizes that he has finally managed to get past that part. After eliminating the attackers in the hall, the assassin is surrounded by the men in black, and one of them tells him to drop the weapon, questioning who he is, since he does not remember any Asian among the banquet guests. The interface gives him only 10 seconds to choose a response: say that he admires Karen and discovered the cards group's plan, claim that he was hired to protect Karen Rampalugi, or answer provocatively that he does not owe anyone an explanation. Rensuo quickly analyzes that the first 2 options seem safe, while the third clearly sounds like picking a fight. But when he uses the second response, the attempt ends up going wrong. One of the men in black says it is better for him to stay out of this and tells the others not to let him accompany them. Then one of them attacks the assassin from behind and knocks him out. The interface then shows that he lost consciousness and that, during that time, Karen Rampalugi was killed, causing the mission to fail. Irritated, Rensuo loads the save and tries again. This time, when the man in black asks who he is, the protagonist chooses the first response and says that he is simply someone who admires Karen, ended up discovering that the cards group planned to attack her and came to deal with them. The white-haired man asks whether that is true, and Rensuo reinforces that he is willing to risk his own life for Karen. With that, the men in black accept the explanation and tell the assassin to follow along with the Blackwater unit to clear the path ahead, while Karen remains protected in the rear. The situation gets worse because the card's assassins have invaded from outside, massacred the security on the first floor, and are now advancing through the emergency stairs. The protagonist thinks that they need to leave the ninth floor as quickly as possible because it is very likely that the bandits have planted explosives there. Karen is kept surrounded by bodyguards behind the group, so Rensuo cannot even see her face. Moments later, the explosives on the ninth floor detonate, causing a violent explosion in the tower and making the entire structure tremble. Rensuo advances together with the Blackwater unit and begins clearing a path through the shootout, taking down several enemies while protecting the escape route. Seeing the absurd way he fights, the white-haired man is impressed and questions whether that terrifying Asian might be some ancient ninja, a samurai from the land of flowers, or even a non-human creature, since no ordinary human could fight like that. At that moment, the interface allows him to edit the character's response, showing the phrase, "I am an executor of Ren Nesser." Rensuo is confused, since that was only the ID he created inside the game, but he notices that some parts of the sentence are fixed, while the faction name can be freely changed. Since that line can be edited, he understands that he can also invent the protagonist's own backstory. To him, after all the effort spent creating that character and progressing through the save, it makes no sense to use an ordinary name. If he is going to add a title, it needs to be something mysterious and imposing. So Rensuo changes the line and makes the protagonist introduce himself as someone from the Celestial Palace. The white-haired man finds the name strange and asks whether he came from the Zhuan Kingdom. The interface asks for an explanation about the Celestial Palace, and the protagonist is impressed by how the dialogue is adapting, wondering whether there is someone behind that NPC speaking to him live. With that in mind, he improvises and says that it is a secret organization from the Zhuan Kingdom, while he is only one of its ordinary members. With this answer, the man in black accepts, trusting his strength, and says that the Rampalugi family will certainly be generous with the reward after everything is over. With the arrival of the police, the surviving card's assassins panic and begin fleeing through the first-floor lobby. Some shout that the police have arrived, while others warn that there is an absurd shooter on the premises and tell everyone to retreat immediately. Seeing the situation collapse for the attackers, Rensuo looks at the time spent on that attempt and realizes that 6 hours have already passed, hoping that this time it will finally count as the completion of the mission. In the ending, the interface offers 2 dialogue options: ask for a cigarette, light it, calmly exhale the smoke, and say goodbye with a smile, or ask them to send his regards to Karen Rampalugi, saying that he looks forward to their next meeting. Rensuo chooses the first option, making the protagonist end the scene in a stylish way. Then the interface confirms that the mission has been completed, but the rating is only 66.5 points, considered a narrow pass. Even so, this becomes the best result for the mission, and the console asks whether Rensuo wants to submit that performance as the final record to receive the merits corresponding to the score. Rensuo is confused by that low grade, but soon the screen opens a more detailed mission report. The score shows that he earned 60 points for fulfilling the basic objective, plus 5 for eliminating a moderate number of enemies, another 5 for saving a moderate number of innocents, and 15 points for completing a special side mission. With that, the total score reaches 85 points, receiving an extraordinary rating. The interface also displays a special achievement called Lolicon, which would reduce the score by 1 point, but explains that this penalty would only take effect if the total score were below 80. Seeing that the mission could still yield a better grade, Rensuo decides to return to an earlier point instead of submitting that result as final. In the game, the protagonist loads the save and returns to the banquet hall. This time, he already has a new idea in mind. Instead of merely surviving the attack and protecting Karen at the end, he wants to figure out how to find Yuffie before the main events. However, he wonders how he can find Yuffie Rampalugi and decides to change the route from the beginning, planning to steal a pistol and head straight to the inner hall. Following the new route, Rensuo goes to the entrance of the inner hall, but 2 guards block his way and warn him that this is a private area where he has no permission to enter. The interface then offers several options. Say that he is looking for Karen Rampalugi, say that he is looking for Yuffie Rampalugi, ask how he could enter, or simply attack. Rensuo avoids causing trouble right away and chooses to ask how to gain access. The guard explains that only collaborators of the Rampalugi family are authorized to enter, but soon starts to suspect him, remembering that no Asians seem to be on the guest list for that banquet. Before the situation gets worse, another man arrives there. The blonde guard asks who he is, and the newcomer introduces himself as Angel Ricard, saying that he came on behalf of his father to celebrate Miss Karen's birthday. He explains that he got his clothes dirty before arriving and had to wear a temporary outfit, which is why he ended up being late, apologizing for the delay. Upon hearing his name, the guard recognizes that he is facing young Master Angel of the Ricard family and receives him respectfully, saying that it is an honor to meet him. Then he allows him to enter. Seeing the difference in treatment, Rensuo realizes that without a proper identity, he cannot enter the inner hall through conversation alone. He concludes that Yuffie's death probably happens 1 minute before 8 o'clock at night, so he might still be able to save her if he invades during that short interval. But the attempt to force his way in goes wrong, and the character dies again. Back in the real world, Rensuo feels frustrated when he understands that firing recklessly would draw attention from both sides, leaving him trapped between the tower guards and the hidden assassins. Forcing his way through does not seem viable, so he begins thinking of a smarter way to infiltrate until an idea appears in his mind. Rensuo loads Save 0 and returns once again to the alley, but this time he does not run straight to the tower. Instead, he patiently waits outside the building for the true target. As expected, Angel Ricard appears on the way and Rensuo notices something strange. Before, this NPC had no special marker, but now that he intends to deal with Angel, the game automatically marks the character. Taking advantage of the information from the previous attempt, the protagonist pretends to be a butler of the Rampalugi family and approaches Angel, saying that his clothes seem dirty and offering to take him to change into a clean outfit. The interface even shows an absurd option to attack him like a highway robber, but Rensuo chooses to maintain the disguise. Angel finds the situation strange and asks how he knows his name. So the protagonist replies that, as a butler of the Rampalugi family, he naturally needs to memorize the guest's information. With the excuse working, Rensuo takes advantage of the opening, attacks Angel, and steals his identity. The interface confirms that he has obtained the identity of Angel Ricard and creates Save 3. Excited, Rensuo concludes that the game really does have a memory function for previously tested routes, because only that would explain why Angel was automatically marked and why the character knew details such as his dirty clothes and his surname. He becomes even more intrigued, wondering how such a function was implemented and whether programmers nowadays really are that absurd. This time, using Angel Ricard's legitimate identity, Rensuo passes smoothly through the security system and manages to enter the inner hall. Even though he looks nothing like the true heir of the Ricard family, the middle-aged butler only smiles discreetly and asks no questions. The guard then welcomes him as Mr. Ricard and allows him to enter. As soon as he passes through, the interface records that Rensuo has entered the second hall on the 9th floor of Blackthorn Tower, creates Save 4, and updates the objective to protect Karen Rampalugi. Seeing Karen sitting beside Yuffie holding her teddy bear, the protagonist takes on the role of an elegant guest and praises Miss Karen's beauty, saying that she even outshines the light. The two remain silent for a moment until Yuffie thanks him for the compliment given to her younger sister, but corrects the protagonist, saying that Karen probably prefers to be called cute. Rensuo freezes when he realizes that Miss Karen Rampalugi, whom he had imagined to be an adult, was actually that little girl. Then everything starts to make sense. The strange expressions of the men in black when he said that he had come out of admiration for Karen, and even the special lolicon achievement that appeared in the previous evaluation. Not knowing where to hide his face, Rensuo realizes that the game had been making fun of that misunderstanding from the very beginning. With that, he completes the mission, and the interface shows the new evaluation. 60 points for completing the main objective, 5 for eliminating a moderate number of enemies, 5 for saving a moderate number of innocents, and 15 for completing the special side mission. With that, the score reaches 85 points, receiving an extraordinary rating. This time, the mission result rises to 85 points, also becoming his best score. The interface asks whether Rensuo wants to submit this performance as the final result to receive the corresponding merits, but warns that, after submission, that chapter will be permanently closed. After finally achieving the best result, Rensuo relaxes on the sofa and comments that he has finally managed to complete the mission. In order to protect Yuffie and Karen perfectly, as well as try to save the guests outside, he had to repeat the stage several times until he reached a satisfactory ending. With that, he confirms the submission of the evaluation, and the interface informs him that the mission upload has been completed, granting him the corresponding merit points. Rensuo also receives a 1-star treasure chest which can be opened in the content storage, but the console warns that since this is a free chapter, he will not be able to obtain exclusive rewards. Then, the bloodstained banquet chapter of Assassin is permanently closed, while the interface thanks him for playing and repeats that Small Worlds offers endless fun. The protagonist then begins to feel sleepy, and soon ends up falling asleep right there on the sofa. A few hours later, in reality, in foggy city London, the night remains heavy near Blackthorn Tower. At that moment, a man in a suit puts something into his pocket, and he is none other than the protagonist character from the game. The assassin takes Angel Ricard's identity and heads to Blackthorn Tower itself. The scene seems to return to the moment when Angel Ricard is received at the entrance, with the butler telling him to enter. After passing through security, the protagonist greets Yuffie, and she asks whether he came from the Fanving Kingdom. Ren answers that he did not, saying that he came from the Zhuan Kingdom, and begins to say that there is something he does not quite know how to tell her. Soon after, back in the real world, Ren Suo appears eating non-stop, complaining that he is starving. He finds his own condition strange, because after submitting the game save, he ended up sleeping for almost 11 hours. Ren Suo remembers that he went to sleep before midnight, but for some reason he woke up famished, as if he had not eaten in a very long time. While trying to recover his energy, some people at the table beside him excitedly comment on the incident, saying that it really involves the Rampalugi family. They talk about the Bronze Shield security force, the real shootout, and even joke that the butlers and administrators of the British nobility seem capable of handling both etiquette and combat. When one of them comments that even assassins appeared in Foggy City, Ren Suo is surprised and asks whether they also know about the Rampalugi banquet stage. The purple-haired girl replies that everyone already knows because the topic has spread across social media and sums everything up by saying that it is assassin. The protagonist is surprised to hear that everyone already knows about the case and asks whether that game became so popular. But the purple-haired girl immediately corrects him, saying that it is not a game but a live-action video. When he sees the recording on her phone, Ren Suo starts to break out in a cold sweat because those scenes match exactly the stage he played the night before, including the man from the Xuan Kingdom whom he personally customized. To him, the game from last night was realistic, but it was still possible to tell that it was something fake, made with special effects technology. But now, the scenes on the phone look truly real, with natural movements and blood that does not look like computer graphics. Shocked, Ren Suo asks whether it is a movie, but the girl answers that it is not a movie at all, just a video. Realizing that he truly knew nothing, she then asked what he thought she had been talking about that whole time. Ren Suo cannot answer properly and the girl leaves, saying that he came over to strike up a conversation without even knowing what they were talking about, which was extremely embarrassing. After being scolded by the purple-haired girl and watching her leave, Ren Suo cannot understand how the situation ended up looking as if he had been trying to hit on her. But the embarrassment quickly passes when he faces the most absurd possibility. If those scenes were real and matched exactly the stage he played, then perhaps that game had truly turned into reality. The protagonist then returns home and, still trying to understand the situation, begins searching more thoroughly online. He is shocked because normally his social media feeds are filled only with ordinary people showing off couple photos, trips, and expensive food. But now almost everything revolves around the Rampalugi banquet. One post shows the shootout scene in the tower and says that not even the government can ban that video, even suspecting some conspiracy by the Pacific Federation. Another post comments on the assassin from the Celestial Palace, calling him handsome and stylish, while a girl declares herself a fan of the young redhead who crossed through blood and fire during the attack. Seeing all this, Ren Suo feels that something enormous happened while he was stuck in the game and decides to search even more to better understand the situation. At 4:55 in the morning, Changi Standard Time, a strange video had suddenly taken over the homepages of every streaming and video website. After that, anyone who went online and opened a browser was forcibly redirected to some random live stream or channel and forced to watch the content. Not even ad blockers or anti-pop-up settings could stop it, as if it were a super virus even more aggressive than those invasive browser game ads. Some people found it strange that their phones were jumping to another video by themselves, while others realized that the recording was appearing literally everywhere. The title of the viral video was Bloodstained Banquet, and it showed excerpts from the mission Ren Suo had just completed in the game. In one scene, Ren appears in front of Yuffie and tries to say that there is something he perhaps should not say, but she interrupts him, saying that in that case, it would be better if he did not say it. Even so, he continues and asks her to remember one thing: her life and her sister's life are worth far more than his. But Yuffie answers that she does not believe that. In another moment, Ren approaches Walter and says that he will believe it soon, but the man only asks who he is. The protagonist then moves even closer to Walter and warns him in a low voice that Card's assassins are there. He reveals that at 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock relative to their position, there are 2 assassins disguised as guests, and that on the other side of the hall there are 3 more disguised as waiters. Ren also explains that there are assault rifles hidden in the hall and 12 assassins infiltrated as guests, so that information cannot leak under any circumstances. Walter begins observing the hall more carefully and realizes that Ren was right. One of the supposed waiters is standing far too stiffly with his right hand unnaturally close to his pocket, and his face is covered with heavy makeup. With these signs, Walter concludes that the place really was infiltrated in advance. The video then shows Ren warning Walter that the enemy's plan is to begin the attack at 8 o'clock at night, kill Yuffie and Karen, and then eliminate all the banquet guests. And at that moment, only 4 minutes remain before the attack begins. Walter understands that everyone at that banquet is a chosen person connected to the Gamma Group, and becomes even more worried when he realizes that they hired the Cards assassins. Unable to understand Ren's true identity, he asks who he really is. The protagonist introduces himself as someone from the Celestial Palace and says that he came specifically to protect Karen and Yuffie. With only 3 minutes remaining, Walter decides to act first and take care of 3 enemies, while Ren is put in charge of eliminating the 2 in front. The protagonist also plans to run to the wine table to grab the assault rifle hidden there, and the 2 begin the operation. From that point on, everything happens almost the same way as the route Rensuo completed in the game, but now the recording looks absurdly real. The man from the Zhuan Kingdom advances with unbelievable reflexes and weapon skills far beyond normal, leading the Rampalugi family in a bloody charge down to the first-floor lobby of the tower. Outside, the sound of sirens and helicopters mixes with the chaos, completely crushing the assassins' morale. The enemies begin shouting, pushing one another, and fleeing in every direction, trying to escape the building by any means possible. After the situation is brought under control, Ren says that they are safe. Seeing this, Yuffie tries to approach him, but a security guard quickly tries to stop her, warning that there may still be danger outside. Even so, she ignores the warning, says that everything is fine, and continues toward the protagonist to thank him deeply for his help. Yuffie says that, although she does not know why he decided to save them, the Rampalugi family will never forget this debt. At that exact moment, the people watching the video begin commenting, and several viewers seem to pause the recording at the same part, impressed by the scene. Then Yuffie asks who he really is and why he is willing to risk so much to claim the help of her family. She also says that Ren has earned everything the Rampalugi name can offer, and as the head of the family, promises to keep her word, even if that means handing over everything they possess. Suddenly, the protagonist notices Karen nearby and asks her to come closer. Then Yuffie tells the girl to properly thank the protagonist, and Karen, shyly holding her teddy bear, thanks Ren by calling him uncle. After that, the protagonist kneels in front of her and tells Yuffie that he has only one request, her. The sentence leaves Walter and the redhead in shock because both of them understand the situation the wrong way. Even Ren himself realizes that he expressed himself badly. In the video, the people who also misunderstood start commenting that this guy is going to end up in the electric chair and that they have already called the police. However, the protagonist soon clarifies that this little girl is their hope and that, because of that, she must be protected very carefully. After that, Ren wraps up the situation by saying that his work there is done, that he was only helping, and that perhaps they will meet again someday. With that, he lights his cigarette and disappears from there like a true hero, leaving the 2 girls behind. In the real world, Rensuo begins reading the comments about the video. One user tries to treat it as if it were merely a promotional video for Assassin's Bloodstained Banquet, saying that it was released that day and that the work would only reach the public the following year. But other comments soon begin to contradict that version. One person says that the Blackthorn Tower incident was already known in London, even though it had not yet appeared in the newspapers, and says that several witnesses, including herself, saw an explosion on the 9th floor of the tower during the night. In addition, she recognized one of the guests in the video as a professor from her own university, so she does not believe they are still trying to pretend that it is only a movie trailer. Another user asks why the website cannot simply delete the video, while someone replies that the recording already appears on practically every video platform, both inside and outside the country, and that a real thing cannot be faked out of nowhere, just as a fake cannot simply become real. In the middle of the discussion, some people even begin speculating whether it could be connected to a mysterious organization from the Zhuan Kingdom, such as Kunlun's Celestial Palace. Seeing all this, Rensuo is shocked and finally understands that it is real footage. Later, he checks other websites and finds the exact same video spread everywhere, confirming that the Small World's mission did not remain only inside the game. He also realizes that the situation has gone even further. Some people online have gone so far as to compare every person who appeared in the video with real-world news photos, proving that everyone there was a real individual whose images could be found in different public sources. To put all of that together, someone must certainly have made an absurd effort. Even so, for most people, it has become nothing more than a huge spectacle. Unlike an ordinary movie, that video is real, showing the complete record of an assassin organization being destroyed, with elements so fantastical that they seem to come from a story about celestial beasts. Because of that, many people watch it only for the thrill, treating everything as an absurd and exciting event. However, Rensuo reflects that for him, it is completely different, because he knows that ending was created by his own hands. The outcome in which the assassins were repelled and the important figures survived was the result of several hours of trying, failing, and repeating the mission until he succeeded. Still shocked, he can hardly believe that something like this is real and feels as if he has stumbled upon something unbelievable. Then Rensuo returns to his room, picks up the controller again, and turns on the console, curious to know what comes next. The game interface welcomes him back, informing him that he still has a reward chest to open, and asking whether he wants to continue from where he left off. Sometime after the incident, at the Rampalugi family residence, Walter receives Mafala Inheim Helsing. He comments that he hopes she is well and recalls that the last time they met, she was only 12 years old. Mafala, now working for the Victoria Intelligence Department, asks Walter to lead her to Yuffie. Presenting herself before the head of the Rampalugi family, she explains that she is a servant of Her Majesty's government and the director of that special department, leaving Yuffie surprised to hear about Victoria Intelligence. Mafala then clarifies that it is a recently created sector, only 135 days old, publicly known as the Internal Investigation Committee under the Privy Council. Yuffie asks what she wants to know, since if the matter is the Blackthorn Tower incident, the Rampalugi family has already handed over all the information it had. She also reveals that the people responsible for hiring cards were probably relatives of her aunt connected to Baron Flaxman. Mafala reassures Yuffie, saying that aside from the mysterious man who claimed to come from the Celestial Palace, the case has practically already been investigated. Card's hidden base in Foggy City was completely destroyed, and as for Flaxman, she believes the Rampalugi family itself will know how to deal with him. The true reason for her visit is precisely the man from the Celestial Palace. So far, no one has managed to find any trace of him, even after complete searches of trains, airports, and other transportation points. To Mafala, the chances of locating him are extremely small. Yuffie says that she also wants to find him, because the Rampalugi family is willing to offer any reward for what he did, but admits that the man simply vanished. Mafala agrees and emphasizes that it was not an ordinary disappearance. Besides the security cameras having recorded the moment from 5 different angles, everyone present saw with their own eyes when he vanished. It did not look like a magic trick, a hidden mechanism, hypnosis, or smoke. It was as if the very matter forming his body had broken apart into tiny particles and completely mixed into the air. She continues explaining that besides the man from the Celestial Palace himself, there is a gigantic organization behind him, capable of seeing through Card's entire operation. According to her, Ren knew exactly which guests were assassins in disguise, attacked without hesitation, and did not waste a single movement or shot. Based on the department's investigations and the confessions of the captured assassins, they concluded that Card's operation had been planned perfectly. Even if the Rampalugi family managed to resist the armed enemies inside the hall, the bombs hidden on the 9th floor would be detonated, not to mention the reserve assassins positioned outside. It was a brutal and direct method, typical of Card's, and the family's chances of survival were practically zero. Yuffie then comments that, fortunately, that man appeared and saved everyone. Mafala replies that perhaps, in the middle of the chaos, Yuffie did not perceive it clearly, but, according to the clues gathered afterward, the man from the Xuan Kingdom is a terrifying existence. Even in such an intense shootout, he managed to protect part of the guests, eliminate the assassins with maximum efficiency, and leave completely unharmed. Then Mafala asks whether Yuffie knows that the recording of that attack was leaked online, and she answers yes, saying that it is impossible to erase the video without taking down the website's servers. Yuffie admits that she never imagined becoming famous that way. Mafala explains that many people online believe it is only a movie precisely because the man's fighting style is too cautious, calm, and perfect, seeming like something that could only exist in cinema or pure fantasy. In addition, the organization behind him seems to have immense power, because after analyzing the recording angles and interrogating several people, no one managed to find or remember any camera at the scene. Yuffie then understands that this man is an even more shocking existence than Cards itself. Mafala confirms it, saying that she cannot reveal all the details, but that the organization behind him surpasses anyone's imagination. That is why she came there to discover his true motive. Without a doubt, he wanted to protect Yuffie and Karen, but judging from his actions, the main objective seemed to be protecting Karen. Yuffie finds this strange since her sister is still only a child and asks whether there is something special about her. Mafala then reveals her suspicion, saying that Karen may possess some special talent, Faced with Yuffie's surprise, she explains that some of the major corporations and nobility already know about this kind of thing, and that the Rampalugi family also deserves to know. Then Mafala decides to be direct and asks what method Yuffie thinks that man used to disappear. Yuffie imagines that Ren's disappearance may have been caused by some kind of unknown ability, and Mafala confirms that the department believes the same. She explains that about half a year ago, people with these unknown abilities began appearing one after another. In general, these individuals came to be called extraordinary beings, and their special abilities became known as superpowers. Yuffie then realizes that the objective of the Victoria Intelligence Department may be connected to this, and Mafala confirms that investigating extraordinary beings and gathering information about superpowers is exactly the department's function. Understanding this, Yuffie asks whether Mafala believes Karen is also one of those people, but finds the possibility strange, since the girl is still very young and has never shown any special sign. Mephala admits that she also does not know what kind of ability Karen might have, because the powers of extraordinary beings are far too strange and varied. Even so, she states that verifying whether Karen possesses this kind of talent is not difficult. Meanwhile, at home, Rensuo returns to the console and sees the one-star treasure chest he received from the mission. The interface warns him not to expect any divine artifact from that chest and asks whether he wants to open it, but it also shows that he has no keys remaining. Rensuo finds the existence of keys strange and already imagines that he may need to spend real money to buy them. Even so, excited by the possibility of opening the chest, he is willing to spend a little if necessary. However, the interface begins searching for keys automatically and asks whether he wants to keep the search active, explaining that if a key is found, 1 merit point will be deducted, and the search will only stop when his merits reach 0. The protagonist realizes that if no key is found, the points will not be consumed, so there is no problem leaving the search on all the time. Since he has 15 merit points, he decides to keep everything active. At that moment, he receives a call from Director Ye and asks whether something happened. The director explains that an emergency has come up and asks Rensuo to go there before 3 in the afternoon. Confused by all the urgency, he asks the reason, and she admits that she became so busy that she forgot to notify him about the civil servant's medical examination. Even newly hired employees who have not officially started yet need to participate, and the order from above is that everyone must show up that same day. With no alternative, the protagonist accepts and says he is already on his way. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Rensuo arrives at the Jianlin sub-district office and, looking at the facade, already begins imagining the peaceful life waiting for him there. Spending his days browsing the internet, drinking tea, and playing games as he enjoys his long public service career. To him, it seems practically like a dream job. Upon entering, he meets Director Ye, who immediately calls him over to introduce the other 2 newcomers, Li Qingxuan and Mo Zhaolong, both recent graduates like him. The director comments that since they are young people of the same generation, they will probably have plenty to talk about. Then she explains that the other employees have already gone to the UXU Street Health Center for the medical examination. So, now that everyone is gathered, they should leave as well. UXU Street is not far from the sub-district office, so the group decides to walk there while chatting. On the way, Director Ye comments that all the sub-district offices have been unusually busy because orders from above required frequent checks on fixed residents, with special attention to any abnormalities involving new tenants and property owners. When they arrive at the health center, Rensuo is surprised by the enormous line and questions how so many people showed up for medical exams on a workday. The director explains that they are the second to last group of the day since everything was arranged at the last minute and the entire district needs to complete the exams in a single day, divided into 4 shifts. She admits that she was so overwhelmed by the workload that she ended up forgetting to notify Rensuo and the other newcomers, but the 3 of them say there is no problem. Shortly after, when they reach the entrance, a silver-haired young man tells everyone to take a form and fill it out on their own. The instant he sees him, Rensuo feels a strange palpitation in his chest and becomes completely confused. He thinks that if his heart were really going to fail because of someone, it should at least be for a handsome and charming man, not for a guy who does not even look that attractive. Mo Zhaolong notices his reaction and starts teasing him, insinuating that Ren may have discovered something new about himself. The protagonist immediately denies it, saying that he is completely straight, but Mo keeps teasing him and says that every man thinks that until he meets the right guy. Annoyed by the joke, Rensuo tells him to screw off and tries to end the subject before the teasing goes any further. Soon after, they arrive at the blood test area, but the protagonist finds it strange to see that the line is also huge there. Upon hearing that he would need to have blood drawn, Mo Zhaolong starts breaking out in a cold sweat and tries to come up with an excuse, saying that his stomach hurts. Then he asks Rensuo to take the exam in his place and promises to treat him to a meal afterward with skewers, barbecue, and beer on him. The young man does not understand and asks whether someone could really help with that kind of thing, but Mo is already trying to escape. However, a staff member notices his attempt to flee and tells him to wait, ordering him to stop immediately. Cornered, Mo Jiaolong reacts unexpectedly and uses a strange ability against the staff members, telling everyone to get out of the way. Seeing that energy, Rensuo is shocked and realizes that something is not right, because at that moment, Mo Jiaolong also begins provoking in him the same strange palpitation he had felt before, leaving the protagonist even more confused about what exactly is happening. Mo Jiaolong realizes that the situation has gotten out of control and thinks that he needs to escape before the police arrive. To him, with that ability, it should still be possible to live hidden in some small city. But the silver-haired young man who had been working there recognizes the power Mo has just used and begins listing several previous cases. The night of March 6th in Rongfang Alley, the night of March 15th on Langui Street, and the incident last Friday in Dongxiaonan Subdistrict. With that, he concludes that Mo Jiaolong was responsible for all those cases and orders him to stop. Mo tells him to screw off and tries to attack anyway, but the silver-haired young man charges at him and manages to land a precise punch to his stomach. After finishing the fight, the silver-haired young man acts as if it were something simple and says it is over. Then he calls Rensuo and tells him to wake up those poor people, but quickly changes his mind and says to just drag them to the side so they do not get in the way. He also explains that it is not a virus, that everyone simply fell asleep and will be fine soon. Rensuo realizes that the man in the black vest is clearly someone from the government and that his rank does not seem low. Because of that, he decides to obey, since moving those people away from there is not difficult at all. Meanwhile, the person in charge of the site continues talking on the phone as if nothing had happened. While dragging the fallen men, the protagonist notices that the material of that guy's vest seems very good, elastic, and tough to the touch. Then he looks at Mo Jiaolong and realizes that the intense sensation from before has already weakened, but there is still a strange attraction coming from him. With that, he decides to take advantage of the opportunity. Rensuo touches Mo, and the small world's interface appears, warning that a key has been found. However, since the key is not fully formed yet, he will need to keep touching Mo, and 39 seconds of continuous contact will be required to obtain it. While maintaining contact with Mo Jiaolong, the protagonist tries to buy time as the key acquisition countdown continues to decrease. The silver-haired young man notices that he is still crouching beside Mo and asks what he is doing. Ren tries to explain, saying that he was only following the order to drag the unconscious people out of the way, but the other replies that Mo Jiaolong is a criminal. The protagonist is confused, thinking that he only wanted to avoid the blood test. And this makes the young man understand that Mo probably realized that the blood draw was the point most likely to expose his abnormality. Still trying to stall, Ren asks how Mo managed to knock those people down, but the young man merely answers that if one day he has enough qualifications, perhaps he will find out. Then he tells Rensuo to hand Mo Jiaolong over, while the key countdown approaches its final seconds. At that moment, director Ye Jiamin arrives, calling for Jiaolong and Ren, worried about the commotion. Seeing the silver-haired young man, she introduces herself as the director of the Jianlin Sub-District Office and tries to confirm whether he belongs to the newly created department. Only then does the young man identify himself as Li Dan from the 18th Department of National Security and informs her that he will take Mo Jiaolong into custody, warning that the official documents will be sent later. While everyone is talking, Ren manages to maintain contact long enough, and the interface finally announces that the key has been acquired and sent to the content inventory. When the director asks what will happen to Rensuo, Li Dan replies that he is only an uninvolved witness. The protagonist then tries to slip away, saying that he is going to finish his medical examination. But as he approaches Li Dan, the interface detects another key. This time, however, the target is on maximum alert and the acquisition immediately fails. Li Dan also corrects Ren, saying that he is not a police officer and tells everyone to return to their own business. The director accepts the order respectfully, and the protagonist answers quickly before going on his way. Before leaving, Rensuo tells director Ye that he is going to hand in his forms and leave. She says that if anything happens, she will inform him immediately, but before letting him go, she recommends that he not leave Lianjiang over the next few days. The young man understands that the director probably suspects he may be involved in Mo Jiaolong's case, so he simply agrees. As soon as he finishes everything, he runs back home, eager to turn on the small world's game console. When he opens the screen, the interface shows that he has obtained a 1-star sleep key, with a higher chance of generating sleep-related rewards. Rensuo finds the name strange and wonders whether that key manifested from Mo Jiaolong's bizarre ability. Without wasting time, he uses the key to open the treasure chest, and the interface reveals the first reward, the basic combat skill. This skill allows the player to automatically master basic fighting techniques, giving the body physical reflexes equivalent to 100 battles and 1,000 days of training. Then the console shows another skill called Sweet Dreams, which allows him to hypnotize any conscious target that accepts being hypnotized, making the person fall into a deep sleep after a process that requires both hands and can take from 30 to 300 seconds. The description even jokes that even while blooming amid the massacre, the bald protagonist suffered from insomnia at night and needed to rely on his own hands to sleep peacefully. After that, the player interface appears, asking whether Rensuo wants to immediately equip the items and skills. Seeing this option, he begins to suspect that if the Ren Nesser account equips a skill inside the game, perhaps he can also receive that power in real life. The protagonist decides to test the basic combat skill and, after punching the wall, feels a colossal pain, finally believing that he really has received that ability in real life. He realizes that the skill is only activated automatically when it needs to be used, but soon understands the problem. Even though he has combat techniques, his body is still that of an ordinary person who barely exercises, so it cannot properly keep up with this power. Because of that, he decides to switch to another skill and remembers that, according to the system guide, it is possible to change equipped skills directly without turning on the console. Then he tests Sweet Dreams, but he does not know how to confirm whether it works, since it seems like a kind of hypnosis, and he knows nothing about the subject. Since the skill requires both hands and the description also says to use them, Rensuo decides to try it anyway. The next day, he wakes up startled and realizes that he had passed out. Soon after, another package arrives, the game's Spirit Musu 8 and Curse of the Evil Spirits 2, which he had bought together with the Hell 4 Pro. Even though he opened the console 3 days ago, the young man realizes that he still has not even turned it on, because he ended up falling asleep on the sofa the night before while playing with his own fingers and trying to test the skill. Despite that, he wakes up extremely rested, with a clear mind, and concludes that the incredible sleep must have been the effect of Sweet Dreams. Then Rensuo decides to start playing the new games of the day, but when he turns on the screen, the interface appears, warning that there is a new game waiting to be played. He is surprised to realize that the console itself has already prepared another game for him. When he opens the Small World store, the protagonist finds an April Fool's Day promotion, but notices the trick. The discounts are valid from March 28th to 31, and then from April 2nd to 3, leaving out April 1st itself. Even so, some games appear at half price, such as Lurk, Soul Fairy, and Superpower Rampage. However, Rensuo quickly becomes discouraged when he sees that he only has 14 merit points and begins looking for some kind of beginner package. To make matters worse, even if he had enough points, some games require a higher level, such as Superpower Rampage, which can only be purchased by level 4 players. As he analyzes the store, he realizes that the available games seem to be divided between those that level 1 players can buy and those that require level 4, making levels 2 and 3 seem like nothing more than a transition. Unable to do much, he decides to look only at the games he can afford at that moment. Among the available options, only If You Are Strong, Climb 10,000 Meters is left, a game with a 50% discount that costs 8 merit points. Rensuo thinks the name is terrible, even cruder than Assassin, but since it is the only accessible option, he decides to analyze the description. The game is presented as a puzzle game, in which the player embodies an adventure climbing an extremely tall mountain, facing extreme weather and disasters while depending only on their own body to survive. The part that truly catches his attention is the reward. Completing the game can yield up to 40 merit points, as well as the exclusive reward, Physical Optimization. To the protagonist, spending 8 points to earn up to 40 seems like an absurd return, practically a 400% profit. Convinced that it is only a 1-star puzzle game, he believes he can complete everything perfectly without major problems. After all, he considers himself a hardcore player. But after spending the entire night playing, Rensuo appears completely destroyed, realizing that the game was far too hardcore and wondering what exactly he had faced during the night. After buying If You Are Strong, Climb 10,000 Meters, the young man spent practically the entire day playing, stopping only to eat and sleep. Although the name sounded like that of a simple little game, once he enters the match, he realizes that the realism is just as high as in Assassin, and the game even allows him to create a character. This time, in addition to male characters, it is also possible to create a female character. The game explains that each type has its advantages. Men recover energy faster, while women can react better in crisis situations. Since Rensuo considers himself too lazy and clumsy to adjust every detail of the character's perfect face, he accepts the default appearance. However, unlike the previous game, this time the naming step is skipped, and the character is automatically given the name Seeker. But as soon as the match begins, all his expectations of seeing the young woman performing incredible and stylish movements disappear completely. After entering the game, those realistic graphics turn into flat textures. The ground becomes brown, the sky becomes blue, and Seeker herself becomes nothing more than a stick figure. Rensuo realizes that the game uses simple colors to separate the sky and the ground, and the mechanics also seem very straightforward. In the lower left corner is the altitude bar, starting at 0 meters, while the green marker at the top indicates the final goal of 10,000 meters. In the upper left corner, there is a green bar that decreases whenever Seeker jumps, functioning as an energy bar. Apart from that, there is nothing else. He only needs to control the character to keep climbing. At first, the stage seems so easy that it can barely be called jumping, since the screen is full of flat steps and Seeker practically walks over them. Even with the simple appearance, the protagonist soon realizes that the game is addictive because the strength of each jump depends directly on his control. If the distance is greater, he needs to press harder. If it is shorter, he needs to press more lightly. In addition, the path has several forks, and each choice reveals a new route to keep climbing. Because of that, even though it looks crude, the game demands extreme concentration. And Rensuo understands that, aside from mandatory breaks like going to the bathroom, he simply cannot stop in the middle. After playing for an hour, he realizes that something is wrong because the altitude bar rises far too slowly. On average, each minute of jumping increases it by only 2 meters, and the first save point only appears at 2,048 meters. At that pace, he would have to play for more than 20 hours just to reach the first save. Rensuo finally understands why that game cost only 8 merit points, even with a 50% discount, since it is far too difficult to play. 4 days later, on April 1st, he is still playing like a zombie until the phone starts ringing. On the other end of the line is Director Ye, telling Rensuo that he needs to report to the Lianjiang Department of National Security by 2:30 in the afternoon the next day. Hearing his sleepy voice, she asks whether he just woke up and comments that young people nowadays really do stay up too late, just like her middle school son. Then Ye Jiamin stresses that he must go no matter what, because if he does not show up, it will be considered a forfeiture of the qualification. The protagonist is confused and asks what qualification she means. Then the director explains that it has not been officially announced yet, but if he passes, he will probably be transferred directly to the Department of National Security. Upon hearing this, Rensuo immediately asks whether the benefits are good. The director says that she does not know all the details, but the base salary is higher than that of the neighborhood office, and there are also more extra subsidies. With that, the young man decides to go without thinking twice, and asks whether he needs to pay attention to anything. He becomes excited when he realizes that his position might suddenly improve, because only an idiot would not be happy with such an opportunity. Ye Jiamin answers that there is nothing special, but warns that on their side only Rensuo and Li Qingxuan received this qualification, so it would be better for the two of them to communicate well. She also promises to send Li Qingxuan's number by message. After thanking the director, the protagonist decides to use the rest of the day to finish the game once and for all. Later, at 4 in the morning, he is still playing and comments that in order to achieve a high score, he had to spend merit points, leaving him with only 2 remaining. Even so, he believes it was worth it. Although he wants to continue, he remembers that he needs to go to the Department of National Security the next day, so he decides to sleep and stops stubbornly trying to keep progressing in the game. After completing the mission, the interface confirms the result with 80 points and an extraordinary rating, adding 60 points for the main objective, 15 for the side mission, and another 5 for saving other people. Then, the console asks whether Rensuo wants to submit that result as the final record, warning that the evaluation can only be submitted once, and that by doing so, he will receive merit points and an exclusive reward compatible with his grade. When he confirms the upload, Rensuo receives 24 merit points, a 1-star chest, and the exclusive reward called Physical Optimization. At first, he finds it a little strange because he expected to earn 40 points, but soon concludes that merits are probably not calculated proportionally to the final score. Even so, he realizes that, in the end, he still came out ahead, since he at least recovered what he spent on the game and even earned a few extra points. When he opens the content storage, the protagonist sees that Physical Optimization is a one-time use item capable of improving the body of any material life form. In addition, the description also states that the worse the user's physical condition is, the greater the improvement will be. Without thinking too much, he chooses to use it on himself. However, after activating the reward, Rensuo barely feels any immediate change and stands there for a while, waiting for something to happen. Soon, however, he realizes that he simply cannot stay awake any longer and decides to sleep. The next day, he wakes up still drowsy, but quickly notices that his body is different and much stronger than before. The young man starts stretching and moving around, surprised by that feeling, thinking that if the physical transformation was real, perhaps there should have been those exaggerated cultivation or fantasy changes, such as toxins and filth being expelled through the pores. But then he refutes the idea himself, reasoning that pores do not work that way, that the dirt accumulated in the body is largely dust, cellular waste, and bacteria, and that it would make no sense for a human body to eliminate fat and impurities like that just because it became stronger. But in the middle of that line of reasoning, Rensuo realizes that the real problem is not that. Then he goes into shock and rushes to the bathroom in a panic. Sometime later, after returning, his phone rings. When he answers, he hears someone asking whether this is Rensuo, and he replies without fully understanding, asking who is speaking. The caller is Li Qingxuan, the other newcomer who was also called for the interview at the Department of National Security that afternoon. She explains that she found this qualification far too strange and wanted to know whether he had any inside information about it. The protagonist tries to play it off, saying that he is also just an ordinary university student and would not know anything. Li Qingxuan accepts the answer and agrees to meet him at the 2 o'clock interview. After hanging up, Rensuo begins connecting the dots. The interview at the Department of National Security, the men in black vests, the Small Worlds game console, and supernatural abilities. With all this in mind, he has a hunch that some special Department of National Security may be recruiting people with the potential for extraordinary abilities. When he arrives at the interview site, the protagonist is surprised by the number of people gathered there. They all seem to have been transferred from other sectors to the Department of National Security, and he even wonders whether this looks more like military enlistment. Thinking it over, he finds it strange that a civilian department would need so many people, but remembers that this is still an interview. So there will probably be a very strict selection process, perhaps choosing only 1 out of 10, or even 1 out of 100 candidates. Li Qingxuan also finds the situation strange and questions how they were chosen, since no one took a preliminary exam, no one signed up for this, and no one received any clear explanation before being summoned. To her, if Director Ye had not personally called, the whole thing would have seemed like a fraudulent scheme trap. At that moment, a young man approaches and agrees with them, saying that he had only recently joined the tax department and suddenly received notice that he might be transferred to national security. He comments that it may have something to do with a certain rumor, making Rensuo and Li Qingxuan curious. The young man finds it strange that they do not know, but explains that information on the internet nowadays is mixed with truths and lies. Any news that starts gaining too much attention is quickly suppressed, making it increasingly difficult to know what is fake and what really happened. Even so, because he has some family connections, he managed to confirm that some of those online rumors are true. Then he introduces himself as Xi Gansi. Li Qingxuan and the protagonist decide to humor him, and Rensuo tries to keep the conversation going by making a forced joke about his name, saying that it could only be fate bringing the two of them together. Xi Gansi becomes embarrassed, not really understanding the joke, and the young man insists that their names seem to have some predestined connection. Li Qingxuan then introduces herself to Xi Gansi and asks what rumor he mentioned. He says he cannot say much with certainty, but asks whether, in recent months, they have seen news about people with superpowers. Li Qingxuan remembers that during the new year, she heard about 2 people on Flower Street, near West Street, performing an ice and fire act. One created ice with his hands while the other spat fire right there. To her, spitting fire could still be explained somehow, but creating ice on the spot was far too strange, since no one saw saltpeter or any other similar trick being used. The topic became very popular on WeChat moments, with many people saying they were real superpower users. But the two disappeared before the holiday even ended, and after that, almost no one could find any new information about them. Rensuo then connects this to the case of the blood-stained banquet assassin and asks whether it would be something similar to that man. Xi Gansi admits that he cannot prove anything concrete, but says that the blood-stained banquet video has already been confirmed as real evidence. Even now, the recording remains available in various corners of the internet, and Blackthorn Tower in Foggy City is still under maintenance. According to him, the higher-ups seem to want to suppress the matter, but that raises a much bigger question. Was it some absurdly advanced hacking technology, or an ability from another level? Li Qingxuan asks what this has to do with them, and Z answers that it has everything to do with them. If he is not mistaken, the department they were called to is precisely the newly created 18th Department of National Security. According to Z, they have already met people from that department, the men in black vests who appeared during the medical examination. Rensuo realizes that he's talking about those guys, and the young man explains that he heard other departments call that group the Black Cats. Since the interview qualification appeared right after the medical examination, it is obvious to him that the selection came from that test. However, their physical condition is, at most, only slightly better than that of ordinary people. So Z says that the real issue is understanding what kind of profession does not evaluate intelligence, ordinary talent, or physical ability, but rather some internal potential hidden within the body. After that, he suggests that the three of them add one another on WeChat to make it easier to stay in contact. After adding Zie Gansi as a friend, Rensuo is immediately added by him to a chat group called We Are the Future Successors of the Xuan Nation. As soon as they enter, some people in the group start commenting, asking whether new people have arrived again, whether there is any pretty girl among them, and whether young Master Z convinced more people to join. Z explains that within the system, connections are very important, and that even in the Department of National Security, maintaining contacts is still indispensable. According to him, even if they fail the interview, they may not simply return to their original positions, since there is a strong chance that everyone there is someone with some kind of special talent. Because of that, creating a network to exchange information and help one another in the future may be useful. Rensuo notices that the group has started bothering Li Qingxuan, especially after some members begin asking whether there are any pretty girls among the newcomers. So, instead of merely picking on Z for acting so pretentious, the protagonist decides to use a provocation to cut off the situation and intimidate Z himself, since he was the one who added them to the group. Because of that, Rensuo praises Z in an exaggerated way, asking whether he was the one who created that chat. When Z confirms it, the young man tests his patience and asks what would happen if he started sending heavy, inappropriate content there. Z replies that, in that case, he would have no choice but to kick him out. Ren then places a hand on his shoulder and uses Z's own words against him, saying that if connections are so important within the system, kicking someone out like that could make him offend people very easily. Z understands the message and is left speechless. Li Qingxuan thanks Rensuo precisely because he cut off that situation, but the protagonist says it was nothing, and that he simply cannot stand people acting so forced. Suddenly, Z tries to approach a pink-haired girl and asks whether she knows any inside information about that interview. The girl becomes embarrassed, replies that she does not know anything, and introduces herself as Qiao Muyi. At that very instant, Rensuo feels that strange palpitation in his chest again, and realizes that it is the same sensation he felt before. Meanwhile, Z becomes excited when he sees the girl's delicate appearance, and thinks that he needs to make a good impression. Before he can go any further, the protagonist approaches Qiao Muyi and uses a variation of the same forced joke he had made with Z, saying that, based on their names, it seemed as if fate had placed them together. The girl merely blinks, unable to react to that sudden approach, not understanding why that stranger had appeared out of nowhere with such a strange line. Zia Gansi sees Rensuo using practically the same introductory line with Qiao Muyi and thinks that this guy does not even bother changing his pickup line. However, upon touching her, the small world's interface reacts immediately, detecting a new key. This time, the key is in an unknown state, but it already appears completely formed, and acquiring it requires more than 9,000 seconds of continuous physical contact. This leaves the protagonist completely surprised, because unlike the previous keys, this one seems to be on another level and requires an absurd amount of contact time to obtain. Rensuo panics when he realizes that this is more than 2 hours, not knowing how he could come up with an excuse to keep touching Qiao Muyi for that long without seeming strange. After all, touching someone for a few seconds during a conversation is one thing, but maintaining continuous physical contact for more than 9,000 seconds without raising any suspicion is something else entirely. Before he can think of any reasonable solution, several buses arrive at the site. Seeing the number of vehicles approaching, he finds the situation strange and wonders whether the Department of National Security intends to take everyone on a field trip. Soon after, a muscular man named Yu Jilong appears to take charge of the interview, tells everyone to be quiet, and announces that he will be responsible for this stage. He explains that he will take attendance and that when each person's name is called, they must step forward, get in line, and present their identity document. Everyone then begins gathering there, and in the middle of the crowd, someone compares it to a line for execution, making Yu Jilong furious. He asks who said that and orders the person to step forward immediately. However, everyone remains silent, saying nothing. Since no one admits to saying it, Jilong does not insist for long and announces that all the candidates will head to a training base, where they will undergo 5 days of basic training. During that period, all internal and external communication will be cut off, and anyone who does not accept this can give up their interview qualification right now and leave. The crowd reacts in surprise, complaining that no one had warned them about being unreachable for 5 days. Rensuo then understands why director Ye had told him to bring a change of clothes. After the announcement, some people begin giving up on the interview, while those who remain need to line up for verification before boarding the buses. Naturally, the protagonist decides not to leave, since he is becoming increasingly interested in the 18th Department of National Security. In addition, he remembers that national security's benefits are better than those of the sub-district office, so it would make no sense to give up such an opportunity so quickly. When his turn comes, Li Dan recognizes Rensuo and comments that it is him. The young man takes the opportunity to ask whether he can now answer how Mo Jiaolong managed to knock those people down during the medical examination. Li Dan merely says that if he waits a few more hours, he will end up discovering it on his own. Then he tells Rensuo to get on the bus and informs him that he is now part of the 8th Squad. Upon entering the bus, Rensuo quickly sees Chao Muyi and thinks about sitting beside her to try to obtain the key. But before he can act, Li Qingshuan immediately pulls him away and says it is better for the girls to sit together. With no other choice, the protagonist can only watch from a distance, as Xie Ganxi already approaches Chao Muyi and Li Qingshuan, suggesting that they add him on WeChat so they can exchange ideas and help one another from then on. Soon after, one of the instructors inside the bus tells everyone to notify their families as soon as possible, because once they arrive at the base, all cell phones will be collected and stored together. The news surprises several candidates who cannot believe they will not even be allowed to keep their phones. And even Xie Ganxi is shaken when he remembers the group he had just created. Rensuo is also surprised, because he thought isolation only meant not being able to use his phone freely, not being completely without it. Because of that, he concludes that the confidentiality level of the 18th Department is much higher than he imagined. 5 hours later during the trip, Chao Muyi ends up falling asleep and, without hesitation, the protagonist tries to take advantage of the opportunity to touch her. At that moment, the interface finally reacts, warning that it has found a key and that, because it is in a sleeping state, acquisition can be completed in a little over 5 minutes, as long as contact is maintained. Rensuo is shocked to realize that while she is asleep, the required time has dropped drastically. So he tries to seize that chance, but before the countdown can advance very far, Chao Muyi opens her eyes, notices the touch, and removes his hand from her shoulder, causing the acquisition to be interrupted right afterward. Not knowing whether the girl woke up on her own or whether he himself woke her by trying to maintain contact, the young man at least concludes that discovering the reduced acquisition time during sleep was already a major breakthrough. With that, he decides to leave this attempt for later, remembering that he still has a chest to open at home, and that during the next few days of training, new chances will certainly appear. After arriving at the training base and getting off the bus, Rensuo notices that there are many other vehicles parked there. Xie Ganxi then explains that the candidates did not come only from Lianjiang, since the license plates show buses from Yuanshan and Pingjiang as well, all temporarily hired by the Department of National Security. With that, the protagonist concludes that practically all civil servants in the province who met the requirements were gathered in that place. Suddenly, someone makes a gloomy comment, saying that if someone decided to kill everyone there, they would not even need to worry about making the bodies disappear. Hearing that voice, Rensuo thinks he has heard it somewhere before. But before he can reflect on the matter further, an instructor calls everyone over, tells them to eat first, and announces that after the meal, everyone must go to the square, find their teams, and wait. Shortly afterward in the cafeteria, the protagonist notices Li Qingshuan and Chao Muyi sitting with a few guys trying to get close to them. So, without thinking twice, he walks over and, looking at Chao Muyi, pretends to be surprised, saying that this really is a coincidence. Then he sits at the table and observes the structure of the cafeteria, asking whether this is really military training, since the base and the food seem far better than he expected. Deep down, however, Rensuo thinks that even though he does not know how to make Chao Muyi lower her guard and sleep peacefully enough for him to maintain contact for the necessary amount of time, gradually getting closer to her is still the best strategy. While they eat, Li Qingshuan admits that she is already starting to regret it, because she thought that at most they would go through some kind of course, not something resembling military training. The protagonist tries to reassure her, saying that it is only 5 days, but she replies that even 5 days are already a problem, especially because she did not even bring her skincare products. Chao Muyi, on the other hand, sees everything in a more dramatic way and says she feels that this will be a turning point in their lives, although that turning point could mean either rising to the heavens or falling into hell. Hearing this, Rensuo thinks that she really knows how to mess with people's heads as soon as she opens her mouth. Later that night, everyone gathers in the square where instructor Zhao Jingzhong introduces himself and announces that For the next 5 days, he will be responsible for their training. Then he makes it clear that if anyone fails to pass during this period, naturally they will not see him again. Curiously, however, even those who pass will also hardly have contact with him again, because the successful candidates will be sent back to their cities of origin to receive even more important training. He continues explaining that over the next 5 days, he does not expect everyone to be as fast and decisive as soldiers, but he demands absolute obedience to orders. When they are told to be silent, everyone must stay quiet. When it is time to eat, gather, or march in formation, no one may be late or leave the line on their own. Then Zhao Jingjong announces that everyone will be taken to the auditorium, where their doubts will be answered, and guarantees that all their impatience and dissatisfaction will turn into motivation after that explanation. The speech ends with a shouted slogan about fighting for the rise of the Zhuan nation, while Rensuo thinks in irritation that this instructor keeps interrupting everyone. With many doubts in their minds, the candidates are taken to the auditorium to continue listening to the explanation. There, everyone settles down in front of the stage. While the audience pays serious attention, the protagonist stares fixedly at the man standing at the center of the auditorium, almost hypnotized, with an expression so intense that he seems completely fascinated. Shiegansi notices that strange reaction and comments that Rensuo is practically drooling while looking at the man on stage, saying that his gaze looks like that of a poodle in heat. To Rensuo, however, the sensation is much stronger than anything he has felt before. If Li Dan and Chao Muyi only gave him that palpitation in his chest, the man on stage provokes an absurd attraction, as if 10,000 horses were charging inside him. The young man feels an enormous desire to obtain that key, until the man on stage tells everyone to be silent and introduces himself as Yu Guotu, Deputy Director of the 18th Department of National Security of Lianjiang City. In addition, he states that he is currently the strongest individual combatant in the 18th Department across the entire Lian province, a cultivator who has already reached the second stage. Since many things would be difficult to believe with words alone, Yu Guotu decides to demonstrate what he means in practice. Releasing flames from his hand, he emphasizes that, instead of merely explaining, it is more practical to let everyone see it with their own eyes. Then he creates a fireball that frightens everyone present and calls Li Dan, who immediately understands the order. Before the flames can reach the candidates, Li Dan uses some kind of invisible force to contain and extinguish the fire all at once. The demonstration leaves everyone silent, shocked to realize that it was neither a trick nor a special effect. After adjusting the microphone, Yu Guotu states that this is the power of a cultivator and reveals that everyone there is a civil servant with aptitude for cultivation. Half an hour later, everyone leaves the auditorium with the feeling that the entire world has changed before their eyes. Now they finally understand what is happening. In the Zhuan Kingdom and the East Asian cultural sphere, this phenomenon is called the revival of spiritual energy. In the West, led by the Pacific Federation, it is usually called the awakening of superpowers. Whether it is called revival or awakening, the essence is the same. A tiny number of people have suddenly begun manifesting special talents, as if they were born with an extra limb. These people can access a kind of space permeated with energy, something compared to dark energy, and use it to release impossible powers. According to Yu Guotu, even aboard the manned spacecraft launched by the Xuan Kingdom 3 months earlier, there was someone with this talent, capable of detecting spiritual energy in outer space. This proves that spiritual energy is not reviving only on Earth, but may be part of a wave on a cosmic scale. Studies show that almost all these individuals began appearing about half a year ago, and the situation is similar in other countries. After awakening their powers, many tried to act openly in society to gain money and status. Abroad, some even created religions, criminal organizations, or used their abilities to intimidate authorities. There were cases like this in the Zhuan Kingdom as well, but these people were quickly controlled by the police and sent to abnormal human research centers, where they began to be observed. Yu Guotu had explained that, although most superpowers are geared toward combat, there are also abilities useful for production and research. As an example, some talents within an institute managed to create superconducting materials and went on to live very well, without needing to worry about the future. As for those who try to use their powers to rob the state or threaten the population, they are not executed when captured. Instead, they are sent to laboratories as destructive materials for detailed study. For now, the state still cannot accurately identify who possesses special talents or what type of talent each person has. But a few months earlier, the research institutes had worked non-stop and quickly developed a method to detect people with basic potential. This method was first applied in the armed forces, allowing them to find the first group of talents. These people began cooperating with the nation's research on spiritual energy while cultivating methods provided by the state itself. As a result, their physical abilities skyrocketed, and they also learned various techniques to use spiritual energy more efficiently. After that, these first selected people were sent across the country to cooperate with the medical and administrative systems, using physical examinations to find civil servants with basic potential and personally train them as the foundation of the Zhuan Kingdom's cultivation system. The black-vested members of the 18th Department are precisely the first group of cultivators selected from the army, while Rensuo and the others are civil servants who also possess this initial potential. Jie Gansi gets excited about this, saying that he knew entering the system and becoming a civil servant would pay off someday, since now they could also become among the country's first cultivators. The protagonist immediately corrects him, saying that the first group is actually those guys in black vests. Even so, Z does not lose heart and says that the Black Cats have not been training for that long either. So, if they work hard, they can still take advantage of this great era of spiritual energy revival. To him, the Zhuan Kingdom is the only country generous enough to allow civil servants to cultivate and become superhuman. Rensuo, however, thinks that Z was not shaken at all after his attempt to form a little clique went wrong. On the contrary, he has only sunk even deeper into his own fantasy of greatness. The protagonist believes that other countries will soon create their own superpower departments because the technology to detect basic potential is probably not that impossible for a nation. Otherwise, the government would not be gathering so many people at once and drawing so much attention. Z asks why he thinks that, and Ren explains that if this method were impossible to copy or had an enormous technical barrier, the state would never train so many people at the same time. Everyone there has gone through verification, but when they are sent back to various cities across the country, there will be no way to keep everything completely secret. Besides, this is only Lian province. According to the deputy director, similar training is happening with civil servants throughout the entire country, so some information will inevitably leak. Another young man approaches and agrees, saying that the only reason they are acting so quickly is precisely because the detection method is simple, and the state is racing against time to secure an advantage. In an era of spiritual energy revival, every additional cultivator and every extra day of training means more strength for the country. He admits that he would like to stay there cultivating for longer, since they will have only 5 days of training before returning to work, while the soldiers can remain training for much longer. Rensuo compares it to a game. They are like fast cycle units, quickly sent back to their duties, while the soldiers who stay cultivating for longer will probably face even greater challenges. To him, this is both a blessing and a curse. The young man agrees that in this new era, whoever acts faster will accumulate a greater advantage, and then introduces himself as Yuan Dong, saying that they will probably be learning together in the 8th Squad over the next few days. Meanwhile, Li Qingxuan, Qiao Muyi, and the other girls have already approached the women from the same squad and are chatting animatedly among themselves. Seeing that group talking non-stop, Rensuo realizes there is no way for him to squeeze himself into that conversation. After the initial excitement about the revival of spiritual energy begins to fade, the instructors introduce the base's facilities and organize the dormitories. The women stay on the top 3 floors while the men occupy the bottom 3 floors. Qiao Muyi and the others go upstairs chatting and laughing, with their keys and uniforms in hand, making the protagonist completely abandon any idea of sneaking in at night to get her key. The next day, Zhao Jingzhong begins the 8th Squad's roll call, but the first responses are far too weak. Irritated, he asks whether everyone is still asleep and makes them repeat it until he hears a decent response. Only after the 3rd roll call is he finally satisfied and begins the day's training. Zhao explains that this field may look ordinary with simple facilities, but in reality, it was configured by specialists to have a much higher concentration of spiritual energy than normal. According to him, the density there is 3 times higher than in other places, allowing training to produce twice the effect with half the effort and helping everyone enter the proper state more quickly. He also reveals that there are 6 fields like this inside the base, all reserved for cultivation. Some candidates begin asking questions, wondering whether the spiritual energy would not leak out because it is an open field, and where exactly it would be densest. Zhao replies that spiritual energy permeates the entire universe and does not simply disperse or accumulate because of material structures, but soon loses patience with so many questions. With veins bulging, he tells everyone to shut up and announces that he will explain the cultivation method, making it clear that he will not repeat the explanation for anyone who misses it. Then, Zhao introduces the most basic cultivation method, saying that everyone needs to practice breathing cycles while running, or the training will have no effect. At that moment, a voice complains that it cannot hear and tells him to speak louder. Furious, Zhao asks who said that and orders the person to step forward, but he soon realizes that the voice did not come from the participants, but from somewhere above them. Even so, he repeats the order and demands that the responsible person appear immediately. Unable to identify who it was, Zhao takes it out on the entire group and orders everyone into push-up position, leaving the candidates confused, not understanding why they are all being punished together. Zhao Jingzhong explains that everyone will be punished because someone caused trouble and refused to admit it, so the whole group will pay together. Xie Ganzi gets angry and questions why everyone should be punished just because the instructor could not find the culprit. To him, Zhao is trying to apply military logic to people who have barely known one another since the day before, and he even asks why the instructor himself is not doing push-ups too, since he insists that everyone is one unit. Z keeps provoking him, saying that after so many reforms in the Zhuan kingdom, it makes no sense to use this kind of collective punishment, and that Zhao should either find the culprit or simply teach the course properly. Enraged, Zhao advances toward him, convinced that Ji is the insolent one who spoke earlier. Before the situation gets worse, Ren Suo and another trainee hold the instructor back, saying that there is no need to resort to violence, since they are only push-ups and they can do them. The other participant also tries to calm Zhao down, promising to talk to Z and stop him from running his mouth. Realizing that the two managed to restrain him using only technique, even without spiritual energy, Zhao calms down a little and admits that they are not bad. Since some of Z's points make sense, he decides to let it go and move on to the real training. Then Zhao explains that the basic cultivation method only works if everyone recites the formula while running and follows a precise breathing pattern. They need to complete 64 cycles without making a mistake, because any failure makes all the effort useless. Each breath counts as one cycle of inhaling and exhaling. Long breaths must be drawn in slowly, while short ones need to be completed in just 1 second. The pattern begins with 3 long breaths, 1 short breath, 2 long breaths, and 3 short breaths. If the breathing is correct, the spiritual energy in the air will be drawn into the body, and each complete sequence will count as 1 round of cultivation. After a few dozen rounds, they will be able to form their own qi vortex. After repeating the explanation 3 times, Zhao Jingzhong ends the instruction and tells everyone to start practicing. Before that, he emphasizes that everyone there has basic potential for cultivation, but gives them a heavy warning. If even after 5 days someone still cannot form a qi vortex, then that will be the limit of the so-called talent that person possesses. After they begin practicing, everyone soon becomes exhausted. Shi Gansi can barely breathe. Yuan Dong questions whether they were deceived, since they ran until they were worn out and still could not complete even 1 full breathing cycle. Chao Muyi comments that not even a dog would be as tired as they are, while another girl collapses, saying that just trying to become familiar with the technique was already enough to knock her down. Completing 64 cycles was completely out of the question, since she could not even reach 10. Seeing the state of the group, Zhao Jingzhong concludes that no one there managed to complete a full cycle and orders the 8th squad to gather. He admits that he thought those prodigies would be able to quickly learn the advanced breathing technique, but realizes that he overestimated everyone. With no other choice, he decides to teach them a basic breathing technique so they can at least get started. Zi Gansi is indignant when he realizes that Zhao probably used a technique that was far too difficult on purpose, merely as a way to get revenge on them for the earlier commotion. Then the instructor begins explaining the basic version, but stops mid-sentence when he notices that someone is missing from the group. Z immediately realizes that Ren Suo is not there, and the others soon point out that he is still running alone on the track. While everyone else is already at their limit, the protagonist continues running around the track, trying to maintain the advanced breathing technique. Xie Gansi is surprised when he recognizes it as a sign that Ren Suo has managed to complete an entire cycle of the advanced technique. Zhao Jingzhong tells them to let him run, wanting to see when that young man will finally collapse from exhaustion. However, 15 minutes later, Ren Suo is still on the track, clear-headed and apparently refreshed, leaving the others unable to understand why he simply does not get tired. Then Zhao explains that the advanced breathing technique returns spiritual energy to the body at the end of each completed cycle, recovering at least 1/3 of one's stamina and increasing recovery speed, which makes the next attempt much easier. The basic technique does not have this benefit. Because of that, in general, its daily progress is only 1/10 that of the advanced technique, precisely because the advanced technique allows one to train for much longer. Even so, the instructor makes it clear that this depends greatly on individual aptitude. Some people with high aptitude can progress quickly even using the basic technique, while others, even using the advanced one, cannot reach even half the average. Hearing this, Ren Suo asks whether this aptitude is something like a spiritual root, but Zhao replies that he has read too many novels. According to the instructor, aptitude is merely a manifestation of physical condition, and, just like the body, can also be gradually improved. He uses himself as an example, saying that his initial aptitude seemed to be 2.13, but in the test from the previous week, it had already risen to 2.33. The protagonist then asks how they can know their own aptitude, and Zhao explains that everyone will only be able to take the test after forming a chi vortex, something scheduled for the 5th day. Then he observes that Rensuo's physical condition is very good and asks whether he has ever been a soldier since everyone else collapsed from exhaustion while he remained standing. The instructor also explains that the advanced technique only releases the spiritual energy reflux at the end. Therefore, the first 63 breaths must be sustained only by physical endurance, which is why ordinary people should only practice it after opening a chi vortex. In the end, Zhao acknowledges that Rensuo is not bad at all. The young man tries to brush it off by saying that he simply used to like working out, even though he does not seem to have any clear signs of training, and Zhao merely tells him to rest for a while before continuing to practice on his own. While the instructor begins teaching the basic breathing technique to the rest of the squad, Rensuo understands that he only managed to complete one cycle of the advanced technique because of the physical optimization reward. Without that improvement to his body, an otaku like him would probably have collapsed along with the others right at the beginning. Later, everyone is taken to the auditorium for a theoretical explanation about cultivation. On the big screen appears a young academic from the Academy of Sciences, introduced as a leading expert in applied physics, and some candidates comment that he is practically a national treasure. The researcher explains that the Chui vortex functions as the central computer inside the human body, because all spiritual energy techniques used by cultivators need to pass through it. According to him, the lower dantian can be regarded as a special area of the body, naturally capable of accommodating this vortex. After spiritual energy is absorbed through breathing and exercise, it circulates through the blood, tissues, and cells until it gathers in the lower dantian. As long as there is enough energy and the person continues practicing correctly, the spiritual flow will naturally form a chi vortex. When this vortex grows to a certain point and becomes active, the cultivator himself can perceive it. From that point on, the person begins to observe the world of spiritual energy through the internal vortex and officially enters the path of cultivation. The researcher also clarifies that each cultivator can perceive only their own vortex, while other people cannot observe it directly. Normally, it appears as a rotating whirlpool, and each rotation absorbs spiritual energy, gradually changing the cultivator's body and storing that energy inside them. When the vortex reaches a certain level, it suddenly expands, greatly increasing the amount of energy it can draw in. For now, the national classification of cultivation levels has been provisionally named the first, second, and third rotations. The formation of the Chui vortex is also divided into 2 stages, the formation phase and the stabilization phase. During formation, while practicing the breathing techniques, the person receives constant feedback from spiritual energy and can already use intermediate breathing techniques without major obstacles. Stabilization happens when the vortex truly becomes stable after a certain period of time, and only then is the person officially considered part of the group of cultivators. Then the researcher asks whether there are people who form a chi vortex without training. He answers his own question by saying yes. So far, every case discovered in the country of people who spontaneously generated a chi vortex also involved mastering some kind of spiritual energy technique. These techniques were not learned normally. They appeared after the revival of spiritual energy rooted in the vortex itself and cannot be completely analyzed or copied. This group of people is called superpowered individuals, and their abilities, although also spiritual energy techniques, are usually stronger, simpler to use, and consume less energy from the internal vortex than the techniques of ordinary cultivators. In addition, these individuals can still learn other techniques and continue evolving. Generally speaking, these unique abilities, which awaken suddenly and cannot be fully replicated, are called awakened abilities, while those who possess them are known as the awakened. And since every awakened inevitably possesses a chi vortex, all of them can also cultivate. The lecturer also emphasizes that ordinary cultivators likewise have a very small chance of awakening a unique spiritual energy technique during the path of cultivation. The Introduction to Spiritual Energy class lasts the entire afternoon, and Rensuo realizes that if taking notes had been allowed, everyone would probably have been copying every detail nonstop. After all, this was knowledge researched and verified by the state, something that in this early period of the spiritual energy revival, ordinary people simply did not know and had no way to access. Sometime later in the Titania Mountains, a car follows the road toward Mount Hyjal. Inside the vehicle, a girl comments that the cold is starting to intensify, and the driver explains that they are already almost 4,000 meters above sea level. The higher they climb, the lower the temperature becomes. So he asks everyone to keep warm since every year there are people who freeze to death in that region. The driver also says that they have already left Titania's forest zone and that in about 10 hours they will reach the gates of the sacred mountain, the base camp of Mount Hyjal. If anyone feels any discomfort, they should say so immediately. Hearing this, the girl notices something outside and asks whether, from Grace to the base camp, it is only possible to get there by car along the mountain roads. The driver confirms this and explains that Grace is the closest city to the northern slope of Mount Hyjal. Planes only take travelers there, and afterward they have to continue by car to the mountain gates. He also says that this is the only road passable by vehicles, used even by the Kamiya people who live at the foot of Mount Hyjal. Looking out the window in shock, the girl then says that if the only way to get there is by road, then that person running alone up the mountain should not be in that place. Surprised, the driver himself looks more carefully and realizes that there really is a woman advancing alone along that frozen path. Shocked to see a blonde woman running through the snow, he first thinks that perhaps she suffered some accident or that her car broke down somewhere along the road. But upon observing more carefully, he soon realizes that she is continuing up the mountain on her own and finds it even stranger, wondering why she is running upward. Then he shouts for her to be careful, but the woman begins climbing the snow-covered rocks. Even with light clothing at an altitude above 4,000 meters, she moves as if she were doing parkour, grabbing the stones, spinning through the air and landing with force before continuing up the mountain. Inside the car, the driver notices that the passenger has started writing and asks whether she is preparing an article. The girl explains that she is an independent media editor from the Zhuan Kingdom and considers that encounter a rare opportunity. After all, seeing a woman wearing such light clothes and performing extreme movements at that altitude was not something common. She regrets not managing to take a photo at the right moment, but decides that writing the draft first is the best choice because she has the feeling that she will see that woman again. Sometime later, on the second day of training during a meal, Zi Gansi approaches Ren Suo and comments that he never expected an ordinary guy like him to move so quickly. Ren does not understand what he's talking about, so Zi reveals that he has already heard the rumor that the previous night, Ren said he was going out for a walk but actually went to the women's dormitory. According to him, someone saw Ren leaving Chao Muyi's room, and now everyone already knows about it. Ren tries to explain that he only bought some playing cards and went upstairs to play. He reflects that the training grounds do not maintain the spiritual energy concentration effect at night. In fact, because of Chao Muyi's key, he wanted to take advantage of every opportunity to get closer to her. Even with 4 people in the dorm room, that was not a problem because they played big too, and the 2 losers had to sit out the next round. With his college experience, Ren knew that playing cards was one of the most efficient shortcuts to building familiarity. Z, however, does not really believe him and says Ren does not need to explain himself so much, because the more he explains, the more suspicious he sounds. Even so, he offers to help if Ren ever needs it, thinking that although he had been reprimanded before, Ren also helped him confront Zhao Jingjong. Besides, Ren Suo is the only person in the 8th squad capable of using the advanced breathing technique. So Z concludes that he has a tremendous future ahead of him and that it is worth building a good relationship with him. After all, for a civil servant, connections are the most important thing. Over the next 3 days, the trainees follow the instructors through different training grounds, trying to discover which cultivation method suits each of them best. Since everybody reacts differently, some people make slow progress while running, and cannot use the intermediate method but adapt much better to ordinary physical exercises. After trying all the facilities in the spiritual energy fields, shouts begin erupting everywhere, with some people activating their Qi vortex while running, while others do so while exercising, playing soccer, basketball, or badminton. Ren Suo mentally explains that nobody has gone crazy from mixing an otaku's soul with sports. Those screams happen because their Qi vortex has been activated. In simple terms, they have generated a kind of controllable organ in the lower Dantuan region, something even more mysterious than giving birth. After activating the vortex, everyone needs to train even harder, because once they return to their cities, they will not have access to spiritual energy fields this good. In addition, they need to master the intermediate and advanced methods as quickly as possible. As for Ren Suo, he told the others that he only awakened his vortex on the morning of the 3rd day. That speed is considered ordinary, since most people awaken around that time, so nobody pays much attention to him. In reality, however, he had already activated the vortex from the very beginning and is almost certain that it has something to do with the Small Worlds game console. Even so, Ren did not remain idle during training. He continued using card games to get closer to Chao Muyi and the other girls, believing that their affinity level should already be high enough. In his view, perhaps Chao could now sleep peacefully near him, allowing enough contact to extract the key. On the fourth day of training, during a meal, an argument breaks out in the cafeteria. Someone tells the other person to calm down and watch what he says, but the situation quickly spirals out of control. One person shouts for them to come at him, another asks whether he has gone crazy, and Ren Suo realizes that a fight has started. Suddenly, one of the trainees bursts into flames, his entire body engulfed in fire as he screams that he wants to kill the other person. Observing the young man with all that power, Ren immediately understands that this can only be an awakening, because there is no other explanation for a trainee who is still cultivating his chi vortex to suddenly use such a terrifying technique. While everyone panics, Chao Muyi makes a strange comment about the guy ending up like that in broad daylight. The young man then begins making some strange sounds, and upon seeing the man in flames, Ren once again feels that familiar heart palpitation and realizes that a new key has appeared. Jie Gansi shouts at him to run, but Ren realizes that the sensation has left him frozen in place. Since the attraction appeared immediately after the trainee turned into a human torch, he confirms his suspicion. The keys are connected to awakened individuals. Even with physical optimization and basic combat, Ren is still within the limits of a normal human being. Against a superhuman power of that level, he would have no chance of winning a direct fight, especially since the guy seems completely unstable. Other trainees tell everyone to get out of the way as they try to restrain the man in flames, warning him to breathe deeply and not let the spiritual energy corrode his mind. When they realize his energy has gone out of control, one of the guys grabs a table to throw at him, saying that the little fireball's spiritual energy has gone haywire. He throws the table while two others rush forward to restrain him, and when the human torch catches the table, the other two charge in and manage to immobilize him without much difficulty. Suddenly, a voice remarks that three grown men pinning down a naked guy in broad daylight looks pretty strange. Watching the scene, Ren wonders whether someone from a sensationalist news department has infiltrated this otherwise serious group of civil servants. When the atmosphere starts getting far too strange, Li Dan appears to find out what happened and organizes the nearby trainees to help deal with the aftermath. They carry the people injured by the flaming man's awakening to the infirmary, where the medical staff use rather unconventional methods to heal them quickly. As for the awakened man in flames, he is restrained by extraordinary powers and left awaiting further measures. With the incident over, Rensuo sees an opportunity to speak with the bearer of that familiar key. He approaches Li Dan and asks whether he still remembers him. The young man says yes, remarking that Ren keeps appearing in front of him like a persistent ghost. He remembers the incident with Mo Jiaolong, and Ren takes the opportunity to ask whether Mo is also an awakened individual. The young man explains that Mo Jiaolong is a criminal with superpowers and, since they would find out about it later anyway, decides to tell him now. Mo's awakened ability is called Sleep Smoke, a colorless and odorless mist formed from spiritual energy that can make ordinary people lose consciousness in less than 5 seconds. Before being arrested, Mo used this ability to attack several women leaving work at night. Ren does not understand how someone like that still dared to remain a civil servant, and the young man replies that it was precisely a way to hide in plain sight. Mo thought that by infiltrating the government, he could conceal his identity, obtain more information, and even turn himself in at the right moment to gain power and status. But now, as the deputy director had already explained, criminals who use awakened abilities end up being sent to research institutes. After that, the young man asks whether Ren is from Lianjiang and comments that the two of them might become colleagues in the future. Only then does he officially introduce himself as Li Dan. Ren Suo introduces himself as well, and when he shakes Li Dan's hand, the small world's interface immediately reacts. The system detects a key in an unknown state and begins extraction, but warns that the key has already fully formed and will require nearly 11,000 seconds of continuous contact. Ren confirms his theory. The last time he touched Li Dan, the interface said the target was in an alert state and could not be extracted. Now that Li Dan recognizes Ren and is speaking with him normally, the status has changed to unknown, meaning the target's impression of him directly affects the extraction difficulty. In other words, the better the relationship, the lower the difficulty. Furthermore, when the target is asleep, the required time drops dramatically. Ren finally understands the secret to obtaining keys. First, build a good relationship with the target. Then wait for a safe opportunity when the person is asleep to reduce the extraction time. On the 4th day of training, Zhao Jingzhong takes the 8th squad to room 303 and warns them right at the entrance that nobody is allowed to touch anything without permission. According to him, if anyone damages any equipment inside, they will have to face the consequences. Upon entering, the candidates see several cubic crystals floating above the tables, and someone asks whether it is magnetic levitation. Zhao corrects them, saying that if they had to define it, it should be called spiritual energy levitation. Since everyone has already opened their chi vortices, that day's lesson will be about the most basic spiritual techniques. Ren Suo pays close attention, while Xia Ganxi becomes excited, saying that this must be similar to the spells in Xianxia novels. Zhao then explains that they will learn two techniques, cloak and lock. Using the awakened trainee who burst into flames the previous day as an example, Zhao explains that if a cultivator activates cloak, they can completely ignore damage such as fire as long as they have enough spiritual energy to sustain the defense. While swimming, cloak can also push the water away from the body and allow the user to breathe. In impact tests, a cultivator using this technique was able to withstand being hit by a truck traveling at 60 kilometers per hour without being sent flying. Against ordinary attacks such as punches, blades, or even chainsaws, cloak can also block almost everything as long as there is enough spiritual energy to maintain it. However, Zhao makes it clear that bullets can still penetrate this defense, so if they encounter someone with a gun, running away is still the best choice. He also shows that the technique can be used in more refined ways. If a cultivator studies hard enough and compresses the spiritual energy of cloak until it becomes extremely sharp, they can even produce an effect similar to a sword, although that is far too difficult and unnecessary at their current stage. Zhao emphasizes that if they ever truly need to fight for the country, they will naturally be given spiritual energy techniques specifically designed for combat. Even so, cloak is the foundation of most techniques, so practicing it extensively will never be useless. Although it is called an invisible battle garment, if someone looks closely enough, they can still notice faint traces of it because the spiritual membrane formed outside the body filters gases and causes a slight distortion in the air. With enough mastery, this membrane can be shaped at will and appear only on the parts of the body that need protection, greatly reducing energy consumption, but doing so requires much finer control. For now, the main forms of damage that cloak cannot resist well are firearms, light-based attacks, poisonous gases, and sound attacks. Zhao also mentions that if someone jumps from a height of up to 30 meters, depending on the circumstances, they might be able to walk away unharmed by using cloak. Beyond that, it depends much more on luck. After cloak, Zhao introduces lock. Since spiritual energy and the chi vortex are invisible, a cultivator can also use their own spiritual energy to attack another person's vortex. Lock is an excellent technique against ordinary people because it directly suppresses the target's body with spiritual energy. However, while using this technique, the cultivator has to keep all their attention focused on the suppression and cannot do anything else at the same time. Lock also works against awakened individuals and can even restrict the flow of the target's spiritual energy as long as the target does not use their own energy to resist. In other words, cloak is a perfect way to counter lock. But if the enemy is an awakened person without systematic training, lock can practically strip away their ability to fight. After explaining the two techniques, Zhao asks whether everyone is curious about the cubic crystals in front of them and confirms that these objects will be used to learn spiritual energy techniques in a systematic way. Even though cloak and lock are simple, unimpressive, and not particularly lethal, they are still extremely precious techniques. Once the candidates learn them, they gain the ability to subdue ordinary people without needing weapons, taking their first step toward becoming superhuman. Because of that, techniques this important cannot be spread casually. They are only allowed to learn them because they have been recognized by the country, have clean backgrounds, and possess the necessary aptitude. Zhao then reveals the teaching method. This is something that can only be understood intuitively, not conveyed through words alone. The cubic crystal is a special tool developed by the Academy of Sciences called the Technique Network device. To use it, each person must hold the crystal, circulate the breathing technique to mobilize their spiritual energy, close their eyes, and carefully follow the guidance. When Ren Suo does so, he finds himself in a completely dark and empty space. In the middle of that darkness, he feels a strange connection to a small seed, but for a few moments, nothing happens. Zhao then warns that the transmission is about to begin, telling everyone to patiently follow the guidance and not move on their own. After the countdown, a flame lights up in front of Ren, and soon many others ignite as well. He then approaches the seed, thinking that everything should be fine now, and when he lights it, he realizes that the flame seems to be his avatar within that dark space. Immediately afterward, the system welcomes the cultivators to the Technique Network and announces that it is time to transmit cloak and lock. The network begins regional authentication, asking those responsible for the different regions to light their confirmation flames, and one by one, the flames appear throughout the space. Once authentication is complete, the transmission finally begins, and a powerful wave is sent into the seeds. Ren Suo directly feels the logic behind the two techniques, as if the workings of cloak and lock are being engraved into his perception. This is not an ordinary explanation, but a complete experience, allowing his body and chi vortex to understand how spiritual energy should be used. When the transmission ends, the system announces that the technique network session will close in a few seconds. Back in the room, everyone is staring at the crystals in amazement, while Zhao Jingzhong watches the group and explains that this is how spiritual energy techniques are transmitted, something that can only be understood through direct experience and cannot be explained through words alone. After class, the candidates leave the room still discussing the experience. Yuan Dong asks whether everyone managed to learn the techniques, and Xie Ganxi excitedly says yes, adding that directly grasping the meaning without relying on words is exactly the kind of method that suits cultivators. Qiao Muyi, however, notices something else and asks whether they realize that everyone's qi vortex is almost completely drained. One of the girls confirms that only 1 or 2 strands of spiritual energy remain floating inside her vortex. She deduces that this kind of technique transmission probably consumes the student's own spiritual energy, which is why everyone had to open their chi vortex before receiving the lesson. The girl continues analyzing that the amount consumed does not seem very large, perhaps only about as much as an ordinary person has immediately after opening their vortex. Because of that, if the country can precisely calculate the amount of energy consumed during transmission, it can teach the technique to exactly the right group without wasting resources or risking giving this power to people who are unprepared. Hearing this, someone asks whether this kind of download consumes the user's own spiritual energy, meaning it might be possible to download other knowledge the same way. Another candidate replies that it probably is, but Cloak and Lock do not contain that much information. If they were compared to data sent through a network, they might only amount to a few dozen bytes. Downloading knowledge from textbooks would be a completely different matter, because it would require far more information, and much of that content would still depend on videos, practice, and demonstrations. In the end, the amount could easily reach megabytes or even gigabytes. Yuan Dong concludes that downloading knowledge is not impossible, but first someone would have to be willing to upload that content, and then the recipient would need enough spiritual energy to sustain such an absurd level of consumption. Simply put, they are still in the age of dial-up internet, so there is no point expecting content from the fiber optic era. After discussing it to that point, everyone feels more at ease. After all, as the country's first group of civil servant cultivators, any real benefits would probably reach them in the future. They are already among the world's top cultivators and have even learned 2 spiritual energy techniques that allow them to act almost like superhumans. Thinking about it that way, there is not much more they could ask for. At that moment, Rensuo spots Qiao Muyi among the girls and decides to act. He touches her shoulder and says he has something he wants to discuss with her in private. Some of the students watch the scene thinking that things are about to get interesting. Qiao agrees, and after walking a short distance, she says they can talk there. Ren thinks this may be his best opportunity. Earlier, when he lightly touched Qiao Muyi's shoulder, he discovered that while she was awake, extracting the key would take about 3,000 seconds. That was still less than an hour of continuous contact, far below the more than 9,000 seconds from before, proving that their relationship really had improved. To Ren, this was the ideal moment because once everyone returned to their cities, they would get their phones back, resume different routines, and Qiao might become too busy. If he let this chance slip away, the extraction could be delayed indefinitely. While he tries to think of an excuse to maintain contact long enough and, preferably, take advantage of a situation where Qiao naturally falls asleep, she takes the initiative. Qiao Muyi says she does not like dragging things out and, with a serious expression, tells him that they can only be friends. Ren freezes for a few seconds, still trying to understand what he just heard. When Qiao says goodbye and heads back first, he remains standing there in confusion, realizing that things have gone completely differently from what he expected. Only then does Ren mentally go over everything he has done over the past few days. He talked with Qiao Muyi and the other girls, went to the women's dormitory to play cards, insisted on eating with them, and joined their conversations for no clear reason. Looking at it from that angle, he realizes Qiao probably thought he was trying to pursue her romantically or was simply bothering her too much. Ren panics over the misunderstanding because, in his mind, he never tried to date Qiao. His strange goal was only to find a safe opportunity to extract the key. Suddenly, Li Dan, who's lying nearby, starts laughing at the situation. He says he has heard plenty about this sort of thing, but this is the first time he has ever seen someone get friend-zoned in real time. Ren recognizes Li Dan and is surprised to see him there, so he asks what he is doing. Li Dan simply replies that he is sleeping. Ren looks at him sprawled out on the grass and asks if he is really sleeping there, as though that were completely normal. Li Dan sees nothing wrong with it and says that at least he is not sleeping naked. Ren retorts that the surprising part is precisely that he is not sleeping naked, but quickly drops the subject and tries to figure out the reason. First, he asks whether the wooden bed in the dormitory is too hard, but Lee Dan replies that his has a Simmons mattress. Ren asks whether the problem is his roommates, and Lee Dan says he has a private room. Running out of possibilities, Ren asks whether maybe he naturally likes sleeping on dirt and grass. Lee Dan denies it and says he will still have to take a shower when he gets back. Ren finally asks why he is sleeping there. Lee Dan explains that he cannot fall asleep. Ren asks whether it is insomnia, neurasthenia, or some overly repressed desire, but Lee Dan calmly replies that he is too handsome to sleep. He then clarifies that the problem is physical. After awakening, his hearing became so sensitive that even while wearing earplugs, he can hear the faintest noises coming from very far away. To him, everything has become far too noisy. Ren suggests noise-canceling headphones, such as those from Hell Company or the large Bose ones, but Lee Dan says that would be useless and even more disgusting. Those headphones work by emitting sounds that cancel out external noise, but in his case, he can hear both at the same time. Even so, Lee Dan says that not sleeping has not caused any major physical problems yet. Ren then asks whether this is related to his awakening, and at that moment Lee Dan begins displaying his powers, giving off dark energy. He warns Ren not to casually ask other people about information concerning their awakenings. Even within the 18th department, it is an extremely sensitive subject. Over the past 6 months, Lee Dan has seen many awakened individuals kill ordinary people simply to keep information about their abilities hidden. He sums it up with the idea that when someone carries a sharp blade, the urge to kill can easily arise. Ren becomes a little frightened and says he understands. Lee Dan then tells him that if he has nothing else to do there, he can leave, since he needs to register the next morning. Before leaving, however, the protagonist remembers a possibility. He says he knows a little method that can help people fall asleep more easily and asks whether Lee Dan wants to try it. Lee Dan assumes Ren is talking about hypnosis and explains that after cultivation begins, a person's spirit, energy, and mind become greatly strengthened. So ordinary methods like that stop working. Ren insists that his method is a unique ability he happened to learn by chance and that when he uses it on himself, he can fall asleep within 10 seconds. He asks whether Lee Dan wants to give it a try, since he probably has not slept properly in a long time. Lee Dan silently reflects that it has been more than 40 days since his awakening without him truly sleeping. Even though his mental state still seems stable, his body is getting worse and worse. After hesitating, he agrees to try. Ren positions himself in front of him and activates the Sweet Dreams ability. As Ren moves his hands in front of Lee Dan's face, the young man watches in disbelief and asks whether those movements could really hypnotize him. He starts saying that he would never believe something like that, but his words quickly lose strength. Within moments, Lee Dan falls asleep right there on the grass. Ren celebrates silently when he realizes it worked, and the Small Worlds interface immediately reacts. The system locates the key, reports that it is in a dormant state, and begins extraction. Since the key is already fully formed, the process will require 303 seconds of continuous contact. After a few minutes, the timer reaches 0 and the system confirms that the key has been successfully obtained. On the morning of the 5th day of training, while the candidates gather in the hallway for their final assessment, Rensuo does not understand why everyone is standing around instead of using the little time they have left to cultivate. He reflects that everyone will be leaving at noon, and he still has not even reached the completion stage. After the spiritual knowledge lesson, Ren learned that the principles behind the formation of the Chi vortex have still not been fully understood, so this stage depends somewhat on luck. Even so, cultivating frequently definitely speeds up progress, which is why he wants to make use of every opportunity. Ji Gansi then approaches and says he thinks Ren is only trying to keep his distance after the misunderstanding with Chao Muyi. Trying to comfort him, he says there are plenty of fish in the sea and that there will still be other opportunities, especially since they are all from Lianjiang. Another candidate agrees, and suddenly everyone looks toward Chao Muyi. Ji adds that there are still plenty of people to pursue back in the city, as though Ren had just suffered a romantic rejection. Before Ren can explain, a staff member calls his name and tells him that he is next to enter for the aptitude test. Ren enters the testing area where the examiners tell him to go over to the black brick section, circulate the breathing technique, and maintain it for 1 or 2 minutes. A short while later, the examiner says that is enough. Ren asks for the result, and Yu Guotu bluntly replies that his spiritual energy breathing aptitude is 1.25. He then informs him that the current average among newly promoted cultivators is 1.77. Ren is immediately devastated, as though a teacher had caught him without doing his vacation homework, as though his father had discovered a test where he scored 59, or as though relatives had found the study materials downloaded on his computer. In his mind, being 0.52 below average means falling 29.3% behind the ordinary level, and if he rounds it up absurdly, that already feels like a gap of 100 million. He even compares it to the average height of men in the Zhuan kingdom, thinking that if the same ratio were applied to height, he would only be 1 meter 18 tall and would not even need to buy a ticket at a children's amusement park. Seeing Ren's reaction, the gray-haired woman beside them cannot hold back her laughter and asks Yu Guotu to stop scaring him. Yu then explains that low aptitude is not such a terrible flaw, at least not for ordinary people. The minimum requirement set by national security for cultivators is only 1, so Ren still passed by 0.25. Besides, aptitude can gradually improve through diligent cultivation, and reaching 2, 3, or even higher is not impossible. The problem is that improvement is relatively easy at first, but later becomes as difficult as climbing to the heavens. Even so, for Rensuo, reaching the average should not be particularly difficult. He will not have an aptitude advantage on the path of cultivation, but he also does not need to worry too much about it. Ren compares the situation to a student who could previously only score 10 points, trying to work his way up to a passing grade, and Yu confirms that it is more or less like that. He then reminds Ren that he should consider himself lucky because many people in the world do not even reach an aptitude of 1, while he has already crossed the most important threshold. Yu asks whether Ren is from Lianjiang, and after confirming it, tells him to leave and cultivate properly in the future, instead of daydreaming about finding a ring with an old master hidden inside. Before dismissing him, he also warns Ren to keep his aptitude to himself. If he goes around telling other people and something happens, the responsibility will be his. The gray-haired woman takes the opportunity to joke that Changlong is short on personnel, so since Ren's aptitude is poor, they could hand him over to her. Yu tells her to stop, asking where these days is not short on manpower. Later, during their final completely free lunch in the cafeteria, the trainees are extremely excited after the aptitude tests. Some curious people begin asking about everyone else's results, and people start bragging about numbers like 2.20 and 2.33 while pretending to be modest and saying their scores are far too low. The more level-headed ones, instead of joining the competition, simply memorize the faces of the promising candidates and later ask for their contact information. At the table, Zhiagansi laments having spent 5 days without his phone. As far as he is concerned, the world could have changed while they were isolated, and there must surely be a ton of people looking for him, with his WeChat and WhatsApp probably about to explode with messages. Chao Muyi cuts through his fantasy by saying that in reality, he probably has not received a single message. Z refuses to believe her and insists that is impossible. After lunch, everyone packs their luggage and begins boarding the buses back to their cities. Rensuo gets on the bus and as he looks at Muyi, thinks that despite the earlier misunderstanding over the past few days, he really did grow much closer to Chao Muyi. The memory of her saying that they could only be friends still bothers him. But after the successful case with Li Dan the previous night, Ren believes that if he can sit near her during the trip, and a natural opportunity comes up for her to fall asleep, he might be able to reduce the key extraction time. Ren tries to approach Chao Muyi by calling out to her, but Zhiagansi immediately interrupts and invites him to play cards, while Yuan Dong also insists that he sit with them. By the time Ren realizes what is happening, every seat near Qiao has already been taken within seconds. Annoyed, he thinks he has a fascinating story about borrowing arrows with straw boats to share with those two as though he wants to use them as targets for ruining his chance. Later, at 7:26 p.m., Zhao Jingzhong gathers everyone one last time and informs them that their next work assignments will be sent by text message within 1 to 3 business days. After that, they are dismissed. One candidate asks whether they should keep their identities as cultivators secret. Zhao replies that it is up to them, but it would be better not to make the information public. At the moment, the Cyber Inspection Department is still removing information related to cultivators from the internet. Although their records have already been encrypted by national security, if anyone willingly leaks their real information and ends up being targeted by criminals, they cannot say they were not warned. With Zhigansi moving around from person to person, all the members of the 8th Squad eventually add one another on WeChat and join the same group chat. Chao Muyi shows Ren her QR code and he adds her contact, but still tries to clear up the misunderstanding by saying that he was not actually trying to hit on her. Chao responds only with an awkward silence and an okay, clearly not looking very convinced. At that moment, Li Qingxuan appears, finds Chao, and pulls her away so they can go eat together, leaving Ren with no chance to continue the conversation. He watches the two walk away and returns to the same problem as before, with no idea how to create a safe and natural opportunity for Chao Muyi to sleep near him long enough to extract the key. Back at his apartment, Rensuo immediately checks whether the Small Worlds game console is still where he left it, and lets out a sigh of relief when he realizes nobody has touched it. Holding the console, he thinks that if some confidential government department ever actually showed up at his home with an excuse to search the place, he would not have the courage to go against the state authorities. In the end, he would probably have no choice but to obediently hand over the device and hope to receive a few houses as a reward for his great contribution. Precisely because Small Worlds is so mysterious, Ren concludes that he needs to hide it extremely well whenever he goes out. After all, it would be even worse if a thief broke into the apartment and simply stole something so valuable. After making sure everything is fine, he turns on the console and opens the World Shop. The options still include, what is the best thing for you to do right now? And if you are strong, climb 10,000 meters. But Ren notices that the 10,000-meter game, which he already completed, is now displaying a loading icon. He finds it strange, then quickly remembers that it is already April 8th, meaning the month's free games should have been updated. When he checks again, he realizes the new titles have finally arrived. The first is Over My Dead Body, with a maximum reward of 80 merit points, a 2-star difficulty rating, and the exclusive reward, Fortify Heart Spell. The game is presented as a management simulator in which, amid natural disasters, man-made calamities, ghosts, and monsters, the player must not only preserve their family, but also match wits and courage with different factions while trying to break a curse. Next comes Lurk, also with a 2-star difficulty rating, a maximum reward of 100 merit points, and the exclusive reward, Heart of Deception. This time, it is a text-based adventure that confronts the player with a choice between carrying a heart that is both burning and cold as they enter an endless hell of lies for the sake of a better future for their homeland, or living as someone who changes sides according to their own interests. The final title is Slaughter Dungeon, a free 1-star game with a maximum reward of 60 merit points. Since it is free and only has a 1-star difficulty rating, it offers no exclusive reward. Its premise is to cross a city consumed by despair, dark caves, and terrifying dungeons to face the heart of the abyss, the source responsible for corrupting the world. Ren looks at the 3 options and thinks they all seem interesting, which only makes the choice even harder. He spends some time trying to decide but reaches no conclusion. Since it is already late, he decides to leave the problem for later and find something to watch while having a snack. Sitting in front of his computer, he starts looking for his usual digital accompaniment, until something on the screen catches his attention, because among the results is none other than, if you are strong, climb 10,000 meters. Meanwhile, at the Lianjiang National Security Department, Li Dan arrives yawning after being called back for an after-hours meeting. He thinks about how he managed to sleep through the entire night after Ren Suo's help. The feeling was wonderful, although now he notices a slight fatigue upon waking, probably a consequence of having spent so long barely sleeping at all. Even so, one thing has become clear to him. Ren Suo really managed to make him fall asleep, so Li Dan begins thinking of some excuse to transfer Ren into his own unit. The problem is figuring out how to justify it, without simply admitting that he wants Ren nearby to help him sleep. As he walks toward the meeting room, he still wonders why everyone was summoned so urgently. Maybe some murderous awakened individual has appeared, or perhaps the Pacific Federation has decided to organize something absurd, like the world's first extraordinary martial arts tournament. When Li Dan enters, the other agents are already gathered around the long table. Yu Guotu confirms that everyone has arrived and begins the meeting. He explains that he called the team in so suddenly because the Red Building has just confirmed an important piece of information. Several agents immediately become serious and ask whether the news came from the organization that provides them with intelligence, while others want to know whether it was a message transmitted by that mysterious man. Yu does not directly respond to their speculation and tells everyone to look at the screen. Ren Nesser has just uploaded a new video, or rather a new series of videos. The title displayed on the large screen is exactly, If You Are Strong, Climb 10,000 Meters. At the same time, back in his apartment, Ren Suo reads the same title and realizes that this is not simply a standalone video. It is a massive documentary series uploaded to Ren Nesser's Bilibili account. Ren is completely stunned when he realizes that it corresponds to the game he completed. When he checks the release date of the first episode, he sees that it was uploaded on April 3rd, exactly one day after he submitted his evaluation of the game. This immediately reminds Ren of what happened with Hitman. Just like that time, it seems the events of the game have also materialized in reality. Ren opens the video and begins scrolling through the comments. Many people still believe it is a computer-generated production, questioning whether it is animation, a motion capture film, or some kind of extremely realistic CGI. Others simply ignore the discussion and start calling the blonde woman their wife, while some complain that the documentary is so long that it seems to show absolutely every moment of the journey, including the most mundane parts of everyday life. One time-stamped comment especially catches Ren's attention by claiming that, at a certain point in the video, the woman is relieving herself. Several users immediately rush to that moment, just like you guys would, only to find that she is actually crouching down to grab a snake and throw it away. From there, the comment section quickly descends into increasingly ridiculous jokes. Reading all of it, Ren is left speechless by the state of today's internet users. As the documentary continues playing, one of the agents in the meeting room carefully analyzes the footage and reaches an interesting conclusion. At least at the beginning of the video, up to an altitude of 4,000 meters, the woman appeared to be an ordinary person. Her explosive strength did not exceed normal human limits and was probably even slightly below that of the average man, which matched the visible musculature in her hands, neck, and feet. Shu Hailin slams a frying pan onto the table and says the only truly abnormal thing about her was her endurance. For several days, even without stopping to rest or eat, she managed to maintain practically the same pace she had at the beginning. He swears on that frying pan that this could only be the result of spiritual energy. Yu Guotu looks at the frying pan and asks why he showed up with a new one. Shu explains that his mother asked him to buy it because the one at home broke, and she is still going to use it to make him late-night snacks. Yu thinks that despite Shu's simple appearance, he certainly knows how to make himself sound good. Since there are still more than 2 hours of important footage left and everyone will need to discuss the contents afterward, Yu decides not to keep them any longer. He tells everyone to finish watching the video at home, write down every non-human characteristic and suspicious point displayed by the seeker, and submit their reports to Wang Qingyu before 9:30 the next morning. The moment they hear they have been given homework as well, someone immediately starts complaining. Meanwhile, elsewhere, an investigator speaks with Zhang He, who has been hospitalized after the expedition. He asks Zhang to recall everything that happened from the moment he left Camp 5 early that morning. Zhang agrees and begins by talking about a regret he had carried for a long time. His dream of reaching the summit of Mount Haijal was what led him to meet his first love, but the two of them were ultimately separated forever somewhere along that journey. Later, Zhang started a new family and now his wife is pregnant. Because of that, he felt this would probably be his last chance to attempt the summit, since after the child was born, family responsibilities would make another attempt extremely difficult. During the climb from Camp 4 to Camp 5, however, he used too much oxygen and ended up consuming a large portion of the reserve he was supposed to save. The cylinder had reached a critical level, and if he still wanted to reach the summit, he could not afford to make even a single mistake. The investigator realizes that Zhang practically risked his life just to reach the top and asks why he went that far. Zhang admits that even he could not easily summarize what he was feeling at the time. There were dreams, memories, the hope that luck might be on his side, and many other things all mixed together. But deep down, the main reason was simply that he did not want to give up. He knew that if he turned back at that moment, he would spend the rest of his life resenting that decision. And it was precisely because he kept going that he eventually encountered that woman and the other members of the team. At the same time, sitting in front of his computer, Rensuo continues watching the documentary and begins wondering whether this is really the same game he played. In the condensed version, which is nearly 3 hours long, almost the entire first hour shows the seeker crossing plains, forests, and mountains with extraordinary agility. She runs barefoot through trailless terrain, leaps between rocks, and moves through the wilderness as though she had spent her entire life doing it. At this point, Ren could still consider her nothing more than an absurdly skilled wilderness traversal expert. Since she almost always chose routes where no roads existed, her feet end up badly injured by the rocks, branches, and thorns along the way. But everything changes when she finally reaches the snow-covered region of Mount Haijal. That is when Ren understands what the jump command truly represented in reality. In the game, all he had to do was calculate the momentum and press a button. But here the seeker is literally climbing extremely steep rock faces without any support equipment. Along some of the shortcuts, she also crosses paths with travelers and mountaineers. When they see a woman in such light clothing crossing those mountains alone and barefoot, several stop to ask whether she needs help, but the seeker simply thanks them and keeps moving forward. Ren is impressed to realize that even this behavior corresponds exactly to the decisions he made while playing. She continues onward until reaching Mount Haijal's base camp, located at an altitude of 5,896 meters. The moment she appears, practically everyone there is shocked by her condition. Some people try to stop her and bring her proper clothing, but the seeker simply waves them off, refusing the help. After staying there only briefly, she resumes the climb. Ren immediately remembers that in the game, starting at a certain altitude, a cold effect would appear, making jumps consume more stamina and slowing its recovery. At the time, he thought it existed only to artificially increase the difficulty, but now he realizes just how realistic that representation was. Above 6,000 meters, wearing only a thin layer of clothing and without an oxygen tank, the body would naturally suffer severe effects. Thinking about it, Ren even concludes that the game had actually been quite merciful to its players. The higher the seeker climbs, the more absurd the route becomes. 70-degree slopes practically qualify as easy terrain, 80-degree walls appear frequently, and nearly vertical sections become the real challenges. From the higher camps onward, she practically free climbs the entire way, advancing from roughly 7,200 meters at the first camp to 9,000 meters at the fourth. Freezing winds batter her unprotected body while the cliffs become increasingly dangerous. When night falls, dark clouds completely cover the area and make it almost impossible to see, yet she continues leaping and twisting between footholds along the mountainside. Whenever massive ice formations block the way, she simply climbs over them. The moment her hands touch the ice, white mist immediately appears, as though the heat from her body is colliding with temperatures close to 40 degrees below zero. In one of the most dangerous moments, she tries to use ice formations as footholds, but 3 of them break in succession, causing her to lose her support and nearly plunge down the mountain. To anyone watching, every movement seems only centimeters away from ending in death. In the comments, some insist that it has to be fake because a single mistake would have killed her. Others reply that the earlier footage has already proven the location really is Mount Hyjal, and that there is no Hollywood set behind any of it. Ren, however, knows the truth from another perspective. The audience is only seeing the Seeker narrowly survive again and again, while he spent several days dying countless times in the game until he finally found a route that worked. The breaking ice formations were the platforms that disappeared when touched. The darkness and fog were environmental effects that reduced his vision, and the massive gaps between the cliffs were the jumps that consumed nearly the entire stamina bar. That woman is literally reproducing the path he forced into existence after countless attempts. Upon reaching Camp 4, the Seeker makes a small detour toward the side sheltered from the wind. The viewers begin wondering whether she has finally reached her limit and will need to use tools, but instead she finds equipment left behind by the Kamiya people. Among the items are an oxygen cylinder, a mask, a regulator, and a climbing rope. Ren immediately recognizes the situation. In the game's shop, he had spent 2 merit points specifically to buy an oxygen cylinder and a rope. And now, those same 2 items have appeared at the exact same point in the real journey. With the cylinder strapped to her body and the rope prepared, the Seeker heads toward Camp 5, near an altitude of 9,600 meters, and begins the final stretch toward the summit. From there, the climb becomes even worse. Because she has to carry equipment, she is often forced to climb using only one hand and both feet. In the game, this did not make the controls any more difficult, but in reality, every movement looks dangerous enough to make anyone watching tense. The comments begin saying that Ren Nesser's videos become more absurd with every upload. Before this, everyone already considered it insane that the man from the Immortal Palace never missed a shot. But now they are watching a woman spend 5 days without sleeping, resting, eating, or drinking properly, while trying to climb 10,000 meters. Not long afterward, the Seeker encounters a team of mountaineers who had also chosen that morning to make their final summit attempt. Zhang He recounts that when they reached an altitude of around 9,800 meters, they were at most only a few hours away from the summit. However, his body finally began to fail. He felt intense nausea, lost his strength, broke out in a cold sweat, and realized that his oxygen cylinder was almost empty. The severe oxygen deprivation meant that even if he somehow reached the summit, he probably would not be capable of returning. Zhang admits that he had overestimated his endurance and consumed oxygen far too quickly, but at that point, he could no longer simply turn back. So he kept forcing his body forward, thinking that if he was going to die, he might as well die trying to reach 10,000 meters. Before the trip, he had already arranged financial security for his family, so at that moment, he could barely think about anything else. As the hypoxia worsened, his consciousness gradually began to fade. That was when Zhang heard a noise coming from below them. At first, he thought something had fallen or that the wind had broken an ice formation, but when he looked down, he saw someone climbing directly up the vertical wall. It was the Seeker. Without proper clothing for the cold, with her hands, feet, and ankles exposed, she was climbing through a route no member of the team would have dared attempt. When she reaches Zhang, the woman sees his condition and hands over the oxygen equipment she had carried all the way there, allowing him to breathe again. After helping him, she simply continues onward. At the hospital, the investigator points out that at that altitude, climbing directly up sheer cliffs without protection, thermal clothing, or relying on oxygen already made it clear that she was no ordinary person. Zhang agrees and says that even calling her superhuman seems insufficient. To him, that woman was practically the goddess of Mount Hyjal, someone ordinary people could only look up to from below. In the video's comments, relatives of the mountaineers begin thanking her for saving their loved ones, and everyone finally understands why the Seeker had taken an oxygen cylinder from the previous camp. Ren is surprised to realize that even the families of the people she saved are watching the video on Bilibili, but the journey is not over yet. When she is already very close to the summit, the seeker stops at a relatively safe section of the mountain and removes the rope tied around her waist. One member of the team loses his balance and begins falling over the edge of a cliff. Without hesitation, she uses the rope to reach him, secures the man, and, with absurd strength, manages to pull him back up. After that, the entire group continues following the seeker through the final stretch of the climb. The mountaineers no longer look at her as an ordinary traveler, but with a mixture of respect and disbelief. Shortly before noon, in front of all 12 members of the team, the woman who reached that point without thermal clothing, practically without rest, food, or any conventional preparation, finally sets foot on the highest point of Mount Hygel, at an altitude of 10,230 meters. As the comments repeat, "If you are strong, climb 10,000 meters," she stands atop a rock formation above everyone else, gazing at the mountains and clouds around her. Sunlight shines down on the seeker, and something even stranger begins to happen. Her face is haggard after so many days without eating or washing, and her feet and body are covered in wounds and dirt. But everything begins disappearing before the mountaineer's eyes. The marks vanish, her skin regains a healthy appearance, and even the exhaustion disappears from her face. Soon afterward, as if welcoming the sky with open arms, the seeker raises her arms, and her entire body begins radiating golden light. In front of the team that has just reached the summit, the woman and even her clothes begin dissolving into that radiance, until her figure disappears completely, transforming into particles of light that scatter across the sky and leave the mountaineers utterly unable to understand what just happened. The next morning, while brushing his teeth, Rensuo receives a call from his mother and finds it strange that she's calling so early. He explains that he returned the previous day and is already home, but soon becomes speechless when he discovers the real reason for the call. His mother wants to arrange a blind date for him. Ren protests, asking why he needs one, and reminding her that his own parents spent his entire college life telling him not to date. The last time he went home, he even saw them repeating the same warning to his younger sister. Ren never expected that just as he was about to graduate, his mother would completely change her attitude and start pressuring him to meet someone, preferably get married the following year and have children soon after, perhaps even a boy and a girl to keep up with the country's two-child policy. He did interact with girls through college clubs and classes, but in the end, he always found internet cafes and games far more interesting. So he gradually distanced himself from them and immersed himself in studying and gaming. In the middle of the conversation, Ren remembers something important he still has not told his parents. They do not know that he has become a cultivator. During training, someone had asked whether cultivation techniques could be taught to other people, and the instructor explained that there was no requirement to keep the techniques themselves secret, although everything related to the training base remained highly confidential. He also made it clear that anyone capable of forming a chi vortex on their own without relying on that special environment could be considered a true genius. After hanging up, Ren sits on the sofa and begins circulating the breathing technique again. Since his chi vortex has already taken shape, he still needs to cultivate it to increase its rotation speed and stabilize it. As he practices, he decides to set aside a day to go home and teach his parents how to try it as well, just in case their family really does have some hidden genius. However, in the middle of cultivation, Ren suddenly feels something change. The speed at which his body absorbs spiritual energy increases several times over. An intense blue current begins flowing around him, and Ren realizes that this situation had been explained during the spiritual knowledge lesson. His chi vortex has finally begun rotating steadily. This means he has officially joined the ranks of cultivators. Ren is impressed because his spiritual energy breathing aptitude is only 1.25, yet even so, the increase in absorption speed is enormous. Just imagining the level of those candidates with aptitudes above 2 makes him realize how large the difference really is. An hour later, his phone begins vibrating, and when he checks it, he sees an official message from the National Security Department of Lian Province, congratulating him on being accepted into the Lianjiang National Security Special Crime Countermeasures Department. Details about his new unit will be sent later. The problem is that Ren is still a university senior and, in theory, should have another month or two before officially starting work. Because of that, he tries to convince himself that there is no reason to panic. Even so, he feels that national security rushed everyone into training, and the moment the 5 days ended, they sent each person back to their respective city. To Ren, that gives only one impression. They are short on manpower. Since there is nothing he can do about it yet, he decides to put the matter aside for now and return to his more important priorities, opening the new treasure chest and playing one of the free games. Meanwhile, in the Lianjiang National Security meeting room, Yu Guotu hands the team a series of documents to review. Li Dan notices that the plan was originally supposed to go into effect the following month, but Yu confirms that the schedule has changed. The National Talent Selection Program has been moved forward, and all the support measures that follow it have had to be accelerated as well. You knows they are already involved in practically every upcoming project, and that the number of available agents is insufficient, but there is no alternative. The cultivators who were originally supposed to be sent back merely to continue training will now be organized into different squads and begin working ahead of schedule. Yu makes it clear that this decision did not come from the city or even the province, but from an order issued directly by higher authorities. The main reason is the video, "If you are strong, climb 10,000 meters," because that footage shattered the final layer still concealing the truth from the public. Now the entire world knows that something has truly changed. In the previous case, the Immortal Palace hitman could still be explained as someone naturally gifted with firearms, while his disappearance at the end could be dismissed as some kind of trick or even a special effect. The blonde woman, however, spent 5 consecutive days barely sleeping or resting while enduring an inhuman challenge in front of the cameras. Even if she has no connection whatsoever to cultivators, that no longer matters because ordinary people will hardly believe something like that was accomplished without some kind of extraordinary power. As incidents like this become increasingly common, the higher-ups have decided to gather every existing cultivation talent in the country as quickly as possible. Other countries also appear to be accelerating their own programs following the release of this video. After sending everyone back to work, Yu remains in front of the screen, staring at the image of the Seeker. To this day, the Zhuan Kingdom has not managed to find a single concrete clue about the Immortal Palace hitman, and now, another, even more inexplicable person has appeared. A blonde woman capable of climbing a 10,000-meter peak as though she had simply emerged from nowhere. Yu begins wondering where these people truly come from, what they intend to do, and, most importantly, who is behind them. Back at the apartment, Rensuo is already sitting in front of Small Worlds, preparing to open his reward. In his inventory, he has a 1-star perception key and an unopened treasure chest. He commands it to open, and the interface immediately consumes the key. Golden light bursts from the chest and reveals a new ability called Infinite Energy. The ability has a 1-star rating and requires only that the user possess a physical body. When equipped, it grants seemingly inexhaustible energy, although the body remains limited by the maximum amount of force it is physically capable of producing. In addition, the base recovery speed is raised to the maximum limit of a bipedal carbon-based life form from Earth, the third planet of the solar system located in the Orion arm of the Milky Way, while all physical discomfort is reduced to a tolerable level. Reading that, Ren finally understands how the Seeker managed to accomplish something so absurd. Based on the human limits he knows, no one can simply continue living normally without sleeping, drinking, or eating for extreme periods of time, and those limits still vary considerably depending on each person's physical and psychological condition. Even so, the Seeker spent 5 days advancing toward Mount Hyjal without sleeping, resting, eating, or drinking, while maintaining her physical and mental condition practically at its peak. Now, infinite energy makes one thing clear to Ren: that woman was not a cultivator. She was simply a mortal pushed to the highest limit possible, practically the strongest mortal who could ever exist. However, Ren soon realizes that the ability comes with a very unpleasant price. Keeping infinite energy active for 1 second consumes 1 second of the user's remaining lifespan. He calculates that if he still had 50 years left to live and kept the ability running continuously, he could essentially burn through half that time and die of old age in only 25 years. And it might be even worse, because shortening his own lifespan could cause him to age prematurely and suffer age-related problems much sooner. Even though he finds the cost absurd, Ren is still far too curious not to test it. He equips infinite energy for a few moments and immediately feels the difference. His entire body becomes light and comfortable, and performing the advanced breathing technique becomes as effortless as breathing normally. Excited, Ren takes the opportunity to circulate 2 more complete cycles and realizes that he still feels perfectly fine. Satisfied with the demonstration, he decides he has tested it enough and removes the ability. The instant he does, his legs lose all strength and he collapses to the floor. All the muscle pain, weakness, and mental fatigue that had been suppressed return at once, making Ren writhe as he feels as though his consciousness is trapped inside a piece of rotting flesh. Desperate, he almost equips infinite energy again just to escape the sensation, but stops himself at the last moment. Ren realizes how easily this could become a trap. If he started using infinite energy every time he felt pain, weakness, or exhaustion, he would probably never escape his dependence on the ability and would end up wasting half his life. The feeling of escaping that miserable state and instantly returning to perfect physical condition is far too tempting. If the effect also stimulates the brain to release chemicals associated with pleasure and relief, resisting the urge to activate it again could become even harder. Because of that, Ren sets a rule for himself and decides to use infinite energy only in situations where it is truly necessary to save his life. Equipping an ability that consumes lifespan just to stay up all night gaming would be an absurd luxury even for him. 10 minutes later, Ren finally recovers from the shock and returns to the sofa. With the treasure chest already opened, it is time to choose the next game. He picks up the controller, opens the month's list of free titles again, and scrolls through the 3 options. After a few moments, Ren points to Over My Dead Body and decides that will be his choice. After selecting the game, the protagonist starts the free chapter available that month. The interface informs him that the first chapter is called Annals of History, has a 2-star difficulty rating, and offers the exclusive reward Fortify Heart Spell. The game also warns that the chapter will remain available only until April 30th at 11 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds p.m., when it will be automatically deleted. As soon as the loading finishes, a lengthy introduction begins presenting the setting. During the final years of the Eastern Han Dynasty, warlords divided the land and the flames of conflict spread everywhere. In 192 AD, Dong Zhuo fled Luoyang in defeat, but before leaving, his troops looted and burned everything in their path, reducing hundreds of kilometers around the capital to ruins. His men also secretly excavated tombs and completely destroyed the imperial mausoleums of the Han Dynasty. The secret history of that world reveals that long before then, Emperor Guangwu of Han had used arts capable of connecting heaven and earth, summoning meteors to exterminate the demons and ghosts that plagued the land. After restoring the territories of the Han Dynasty, he reorganized the dragon veins of the Central Plains and turned the imperial tombs into the core of a gigantic formation. Using the dragon veins as its pathways, along with the will of heaven, the ley lines of the earth, and the collective power of humanity, Guangwu completely sealed the spiritual veins of the Central Plains and eliminated the emergence of new demonic creatures at its source. However, with the imperial tombs now destroyed, that great formation also ceased to function. The spiritual veins began to revive, and with them, the demonic chaos Guangwu had eliminated centuries ago was about to return. At the same time, the heroes of that world would also benefit from the return of spiritual energy. Humanity would once again enter a dark age similar to the ancient dynasties, with demons using supernatural powers to plunge the world into chaos, while extraordinary individuals relied on their own strength to protect the people. However, Guangwu had apparently foreseen even this possibility. If the spiritual veins ever returned, it would mean that his tombs had been destroyed, the dragon veins had fallen into disorder, and the Han Dynasty had entered a major crisis. Because of that, while still alive, he found descendants of the Huo family, belonging to the bloodline of the legendary champion Marquis, sealed the cultivation methods of the Yuntai Pavilion within their blood, and imposed 3 great restrictions upon the lineage. The first required his descendants to protect the Han Dynasty to the death and never attempt to seize political power for themselves. The second decreed that, as long as it did not violate the first rule, they were to exterminate demons to the death. And the third stated that, without breaking the previous 2 conditions, they had to continue the family bloodline. If any of these rules were violated, the curse of the champion bloodline would be activated, and its restrictions would grow increasingly powerful. Now, with the return of the spiritual veins, the descendants who had lived anonymously for generations finally awakened the talents, knowledge, and missions hidden within their own blood. After this enormous introduction, the interface asks Rensuo to choose the family's surname and initially presents Huo. It then asks for the name of the first head of the lineage. Ren immediately realizes that he has reached the classic character naming section and starts thinking of something that sounds both imposing and domineering. After staring at the screen for a few seconds, he gets an idea and changes the family's surname to Ren, naming the first family head Ren Waxing. The story then truly begins in a cemetery surrounded by mountains. Standing before several newly erected gravestones, the only 3 surviving members of the Ren family mourn the deaths of their relatives. Ren Waxing tries to remain composed and tells his second and third brothers to stop crying. Only the 3 of them remain now, so they must shoulder the responsibility left behind by the family and fulfill their mission. Ren Feifan, kneeling before the graves, cannot accept it and asks what kind of mission could possibly justify the tragic deaths of their father, mother, grandparents, uncles, and aunts. Ren Changsheng tells him to consult the knowledge inherited through their bloodline. The truth is that they all carry the blood curse of the champion Marquis. In exchange, they were born with absurdly powerful cultivation talent and possess bodies extremely close to the so-called immaculate body, allowing them to become chi refiners very quickly whenever the spiritual veins awaken. However, there is a terrifying problem. A true immaculate body practically merges with the Tao, while they only approach that state. Once they pass the age of 24, their bodies complete that transformation, and the moment they come into contact with spiritual energy, They are completely destroyed by it, leaving behind neither flesh nor bones, only a pool of blood. The champion bloodline, therefore, is both a blessing from heaven and a curse imposed by their inherited mission. Ren Changsheng sums up the situation bluntly. None of the three will live beyond the age of 24. Ren Feifan falls into despair upon realizing that they have practically been condemned from birth. Later, inside the Ren family residence, the brothers continue discussing what they can do. Changsheng explains that there is no real choice. They are being pushed forward both by their own bloodline and by the era into which they were born. Before deciding what to do next, they must understand exactly what kind of blood they carry. The revival of spiritual energy awakened not only their cultivation talent, but also knowledge passed down through generations. It is through these inherited memories that they know the deaths of the other family members were caused by the curse of the champion bloodline itself. Changsheng also explains that the legendary champion Marquis never needed to study or cultivate like an ordinary person to attain his strength. Even at a very young age, he was already practically invincible and had also mastered knowledge of astronomy, geography, divination, and strategy. This was because he directly inherited all the experience accumulated by generations of cultivators from the Huo family, while also possessing extraordinary comprehension and talent from birth. Since Guangwu placed the three restrictions on that bloodline, his descendants have no choice but to continue carrying out the three missions. When spiritual energy reappears and demons return to spread chaos, the family must protect the legitimate bloodline of the Han dynasty and help Guangwu's descendants rebuild the empire. Once the Han dynasty is restored, they must exterminate the demonic creatures and assist in sealing the spiritual veins again. Only when those veins return to dormancy and the family loses its powers, becoming ordinary once more, will they be able to return to obscurity and peacefully continue the champion bloodline. The problem is that, according to their inherited knowledge, the Ren family apparently never violated any of the three restrictions. Changsheng cannot understand why the curse would have been triggered so violently. Ren Wuxing thinks for a moment and reaches an uncomfortable conclusion. If the curse was activated, then some rule must have been broken, even if they do not know which one. Changsheng insists that no one in the family ever thought about rebelling against the Han dynasty or abandoning the mission to exterminate demons. Wuxing then raises another possibility. Perhaps Guangwu's true bloodline has already been severed. Changsheng is alarmed by the idea, but Wuxing reminds him that the Yellow Turban Rebellion has already happened, and the entire land is engulfed in chaos. He has also heard that the 18 warlords formed the Guangdong Coalition to oppose Dongzhuo, who currently controls the emperor. Officially, the emperor of the Han dynasty still exists, but that does not necessarily mean he still belongs to Guangwu's direct bloodline. Changsheng begins to suspect that noble families or ministers may have usurped the legitimate bloodline at some point in history. To him, that seems like the only explanation capable of justifying the curse. The brothers conclude that Guangwu may have calculated countless possibilities while he was alive, but after death, even he was still unable to completely overcome human nature and the will of heaven. Even so, Wuxing reveals that the emperor left the family a possible path to survival. Guangwu went so far as to sever the spiritual veins, interrupt cultivation lineages, and impose restrictions on his descendants to ensure that the Han dynasty would survive for countless generations. But apparently he also left a way for the champion bloodline to avoid disappearing completely. Changsheng quickly understands what his brother means, and asks whether Wuxing really considers forming relationships with spirits a viable path to survival. Wuxing reminds him that the restrictions have not disappeared. In fact, they have become even stronger. They all still carry the mission engraved in their blood, and no descendant can escape it once the bloodline awakens. Even while retaining their own consciousness, whenever they encounter Guangwu's descendants, they are compelled to serve them loyally regardless of the cost. When they encounter demons or ghosts, they feel the need to destroy them at any cost. And when they encounter certain spirits capable of producing descendants with them, the urge to continue the bloodline also awakens. Ren Feifan does not understand that last part and asks what exactly it means to have children with spirits. Changsheng says it would be faster for him to simply consult the inherited knowledge, but ends up explaining anyway. The champion Marquis became famous for saying that as long as the Xiongnu had not been destroyed, he would not think about starting a family. However, there was another reason behind that situation. The curse of the champion bloodline also extends to the partner of whoever carries that blood. When someone from the champion bloodline becomes intimate with an ordinary person, the partner's spiritual energy is absorbed by the bloodline, causing them to wither away and die within a single night. Therefore, once the bloodline awakens, its bearers are not only doomed to die at the age of 24, but also lose the ability to continue the family through ordinary humans. In the past, Guangwu found their ancestors among the descendants of Huo Yu, the younger brother of the champion Marquis, artificially awakened that bloodline and then sealed it again. That was precisely what allowed their ancestors to have children normally during eras without spiritual energy. Fei Fan immediately remembers Xiao Chu, a girl he saw at the market, and asks in horror whether that means he can never marry her. Changsheng confirms that he cannot become a couple with any ordinary person, because his wife would die before his eyes on their wedding night. Fei Fan collapses into despair again, lamenting that he will remain single for the rest of his life and has disappointed his parents by allowing his branch of the bloodline to end with him. Waxing tells him not to despair so quickly. They cannot normally have children with humans, but Guangwu discovered that there are other beings capable of enduring the champion bloodline. These are spirits such as mountain and earth spirits. Pure beings born from nature itself that have never harmed humans can coexist with them and even produce descendants. This still consumes a considerable amount of life force, and many of those beings practically lack human emotions, but Waxing says it is possible to negotiate with them. Realizing that there is still some hope, Fei Fan asks whether his bloodline truly does not have to end there, and Waxing confirms it. He declares that the Ren family will continue to exist and that one day the bloodline curse will return to dormancy as well. Generation after generation, they will remain on watch until a new dynasty capable of unifying the land appears. When that moment comes, the family will hand over the method for sealing the spiritual veins and use the power of the entire nation to once again separate the ordinary world from the spiritual world. Without spiritual energy, there will be no demons threatening ordinary people, and the curse of the champion bloodline will disappear along with it. Changsheng comments that future generations of the family will probably hate Waxing for pushing such a terrible mission onto his descendants. Waxing accepts that possibility and says this is their fate. After receiving all that inherited knowledge, even he cannot tell whether the feelings he carries truly came from his own will, were caused by the restrictions left by Guangwu, or whether he also inherited the champion Marquis's determination to protect the world and exterminate demons. Even so, Waxing believes his descendants will continue moving forward. They will step over his corpse, cleanse the human world of demonic creatures, and one day witness a truly prosperous and peaceful era. After that, the time will come when the spiritual veins fall silent again, and the bloodline itself returns to dormancy. That is their mission, the responsibility of carrying an orthodox inheritance and, at the same time, the curse left behind by Guangwu's restrictions. They were born because of this fate, and they will die for it as well. When the conversation ends, Changsheng officially recognizes Ren Waxing as the current head of the Ren family. However, he reminds them that the three of them are still extremely weak and that the outside world is engulfed in war. Before trying to fulfill any great mission, they need to cultivate. Only after gaining enough strength can they think about everything else. At that point, Rensuo realizes that this entire enormous sequence was finally just the game's introduction. The story scenes end and the actual gameplay begins. The interface opens the cultivation option and asks him to choose which direction each family member should develop in during the next season. There are 6 paths available: attack, defense, scout, movement, healing, and management. But Ren receives only 3 action points to distribute. Since the family has exactly 3 members, Ren begins wondering whether the number of points is related to the number of available people. Since he still does not properly understand the other attributes, he decides to keep things simple and put all 3 points into attack. Inside the game, Ren Changsheng accepts the decision and announces that during the coming autumn, the 3 brothers will devote themselves to studying offensive techniques together. Time advances from autumn to winter, and the results appear on the screen. After a period of cultivation, the 3 learned new techniques and significantly improved their offensive capabilities. Ren Waxing masters the sword control technique, Ren Changsheng learns a fire spell, and Ren Feifan develops the spiritual spear technique. While Ren Suo is still analyzing their new abilities, Changsheng stands up and announces that a visitor has arrived to speak with the head of the family. At that moment, a young woman with an unusual appearance appears at the entrance of the residence. She introduces herself as the earth spirit of the Tai-Bai Plain and says she has come to ask the immortal master for help. Demonic soldiers and ghost generals have begun spreading throughout the region, and she wants the Ren family to take action and eliminate them. She then praises the 3 brothers, saying that despite being so young, their cultivation has advanced rapidly since the revival of the spiritual veins, and with enough time, they will surely become great immortals of their era. She then explains why she came to the Ren family residence. During the Battle of Hulao Pass, an enormous amount of resentment and death aura accumulated among the corpses and souls of the fallen, giving rise to extremely violent evil spirits. Some of those demonic soldiers and ghost generals have already begun entering the Tai-Bai Plain, which lies very close to the Ren family, so she personally came to ask the 3 immortal masters to take action. Ren Changsheng, however, refuses to simply work for free and asks what benefit they will receive for driving those creatures away. The spirit becomes somewhat embarrassed and explains that before the spiritual veins fell dormant, killing demons and eliminating evil creatures was considered a natural duty of cultivators. She herself had been asleep for a very long time and only recently awakened with the return of the spiritual veins, so she truly has nothing valuable to offer the brothers as a reward. Changsheng thinks for a moment and then proposes an alternative. The Ren family knows a method of spiritual union that allows its members to produce descendants with spirits, so he asked whether she would be willing to use that as payment. The proposal catches the spirit completely off guard. She explains that for a cultivator to continue their bloodline, the best option would normally be another cultivator of the opposite sex. Noble and wealthy families could still choose ordinary people as inferior alternatives, so she does not understand why these three would specifically seek out earth spirits. Furthermore, even if cultivators can produce descendants through spiritual union with beings like her, those children usually have extremely short lives, often dying before they even reach 30. As she speaks, however, the spirit takes a closer look at the three brothers and notices something strange. Only then does she realize that they possess extremely special bodies, naturally connected to the Tao. Changsheng replies that this is far from a blessing and considers the condition just another curse. The spirit agrees, remembering that someone with an immaculate body will inevitably face the tribulation associated with merging with the Tao, and without overcoming that barrier, there is practically no possibility of leaving descendants. Now she finally understands why the Ren family is seeking spirits to continue their bloodline. She says the proposal is not entirely impossible, but there is another problem. The brother's blood is far too powerful, and the body of an ordinary spirit would probably be unable to bear a descendant of that lineage, especially one with a cultivation level as low as hers. The only possibility would be to prepare enough spirit crystals and use them as a kind of vessel during the spiritual union. That way, the energy within the crystals would help sustain the process and allow the bloodline to be passed on. Even then, the cost to the spirit would remain enormous. Her own foundation would be severely depleted, and she would fall into a sleep that could last 100 years. Because of that, she would only agree if the Ren family provided enough spirit crystals as compensation. Ren Waxing asks what exactly these crystals are, and the spirit explains that they are among the most important resources for cultivators, commonly known simply as spirit crystals. They are formed from highly concentrated spiritual energy, naturally appear near spiritual veins, and can emerge in different regions. In addition, when demons, monsters, ghosts, or even cultivators die, the energy accumulated within their bodies can also condense into these crystals. Changsheng then tests how far the negotiation can go and asks what would happen if they did not have enough crystals but still insisted on performing spiritual union with her. The spirit makes it clear that this would not work. Spiritual union requires absolute concentration and mutual consent, and spirits like her are beings created by heaven and earth who revere only nature itself. They would rather disappear completely than be forced to submit to another living being. Because of that, trying to force her would be useless. Before leaving, she explains that she lives in the Tai-Bai Plain and that once the brothers gather the necessary crystals, they can come find her. She also asks them not to forget about the demonic soldiers and ghost generals scattered throughout the region, because if they continue causing destruction, even the Tai-Bai Plain itself will become corrupted. After she leaves, Changsheng concludes that there really is only one way to deal with spirits: negotiation. As spiritual beings nurtured by heaven and earth, they would rather die and have their Tao destroyed than accept submission. Ren Suo finally understands what the first major mission of the game will be. After all that talk about protecting the world, rebuilding dynasties, and exterminating demons, the initial objective is simply to make sure the family can have a child. The interface confirms the mission and instructs Ren to eliminate evil creatures, obtain spirit crystals, and continue the Ren family bloodline. If every member of the family dies before leaving descendants, it will result in complete defeat. Changsheng also realizes that they need to act quickly. If the demonic soldiers and ghost generals continue occupying the Tai-Bai Plain, it may affect the earth spirit's cultivation, and at the moment she is the only possible spiritual mother they know. The higher her cultivation becomes, the better the aptitude of the descendant she could produce should be as well. Because of that, Changsheng asks the family head to organize an expedition immediately. The interface opens two options, cultivation and expedition, and displays the three available members. Ren Waxing is 18 years old, Ren Changsheng is 16, and Ren Faifan is only 14. All three have 1 point in attack and 1 point in management, while defense, scout, movement, and healing are still at 0. However, there is one important rule. To ensure that the residence continues functioning, at least one person with management ability must remain at home. Ren Suo therefore decides to send Ren Waxing and Ren Faifan, leaving Changsheng in charge of the residents. Before departure, the game also displays their available resources. The family has only 41 portions of food, with each portion feeding one person for one day, and 14 portions of wealth in gold and silver, each enough to purchase one day's ration. Seeing how nearly broke the Ren family is, the protagonist decides not to overdo it and takes only 20 portions of food for the journey. With the expedition team formed, Changsheng remains sitting alone at the residence and, since he has been left behind, decides to make use of the time by cultivating. Meanwhile, Waxing and Faifan set out on foot toward the Tai Bai Plain. Along the way, the map presents several forks, and Ren notices that they all seem to lead to the same destination but probably hide different encounters. Since he still has no idea which route is best, he simply chooses one at random. Not long afterward, the first encounter appears. A huge tiger leaps out of the forest and charges at the brothers. Ren gets excited when he realizes that a battle is finally about to begin. But the moment Ren Faifan sees the creature, he panics and runs away, leaving his older brother alone to face the beast. Ren is left speechless by the boy's cowardice. But when he checks the tiger's stats, he notices something even stranger. Despite its threatening appearance, it has only 0.8 attack and practically no other relevant attributes. The battle begins, and Waxing manages to fight the tiger without much difficulty. After winning, the group loots the carcass and obtains 7 portions of beast meat. As soon as Faifan returns, Waxing asks why the hell he ran away. Embarrassed, the boy simply admits that he was scared. The journey continues, and farther ahead the two encounter other threats, including venomous snakes and enormous brown bears. Little by little, Faifan finally begins building up his courage and takes part in the battles. At one point, he even uses a wooden staff to violently pierce through a bear's body. It is during these fights that Ren Suo notices an important feature of the system. He can only directly control Ren Waxing. The other family members have their own action logic and decide on their own when to attack, flee, or use abilities, without the player being able to fully command them. When the brothers finally enter the Tai Bai Plain, they encounter a girl running desperately through the forest. Several zombie soldiers are chasing behind her while laughing. Faifan immediately recognizes the young woman as Xiao Kui, the girl he had previously met at the market. Without waiting for any orders, he runs over to her, takes Xiao Kui with him, and draws one of the ghost soldiers away. The problem is that by doing so, he leaves the other 4 for his dear older brother to face alone. Ren Suo cannot believe that this brother practically dumps every problem onto Waxing's shoulders. But when the battle begins, he notices something else. The combat system actually works like a turn-based tactical RPG. The enemies appear positioned on a kind of grid, and with every action Ren Waxing takes, the ghost soldiers advance one space. Since the ghosts are melee units and Waxing possesses a technique capable of attacking from a distance, Ren immediately understands the advantage. He begins keeping his distance while launching attacks with the sword control technique, retreating whenever the enemies get too close. This allows him to use a hit-and-run strategy without giving the ghosts any chance to reach him. The battle ends and Ren receives an intact straight sword, 1 portion of gold and silver, and 6 spirit crystals. Waxing immediately equips the sword, increasing his combat power by 0.3. Once the situation settles down, Faifan introduces Xiao Kui to his brother. He explains that he already knew the girl from the market and that her family lived in a small village near the Tai Bai Plain. However, the village was attacked by the same demonic soldiers and ghost generals, and practically everyone was killed. Faifan wants to help Xiao Kui avenge them. The brothers then head to the ruined village, and, after a few minor complications along the way, find the remaining ghost soldiers. This time, Faifan displays a completely different attitude from the one he showed against the tiger. Using his spiritual spear technique, he charges at the enemies and demonstrates that the weapon has attacks capable of striking several targets at once. With sweeping attacks and thrusts, Faifan quickly eliminates 4 ghost soldiers, showing even greater efficiency than his older brother. When the battle ends, all the enemies in the area have been eliminated. The loot includes 2 intact straight swords, 3 spears, 4 portions of gold and silver, and most importantly, 40 spirit crystals. Afterward, Faifan brings Xiao Kui to Waxing and asks permission to take her back to the family residence. Now that her village has been destroyed, a girl alone would have little chance of surviving in a world engulfed in chaos. Waxing does not object, although he warns that he will not protect Faifan if Changsheng starts complaining about the decision. Faifan, however, firmly replies that saving a life is his duty, and so Xiao Kui accompanies the two of them back home. But when the expedition returns, Ren Suo notices that Xiao Kui is not the only newcomer at the residence. There are 3 new women on the screen. Changsheng explains what happened while the brothers were away. He heard cries for help coming from the mountain and found the carriage of a young woman named Zhuo Yu wrecked along the road. She and her 2 maids had nearly died in the accident. but Changsheng had just learned healing techniques and managed to save them. Now Zhuo Yu wishes to remain under the protection of the Ren family for at least a year, and, in exchange, is willing to pay 3,000 portions of wealth in gold and silver. Ren Suo can hardly believe that number. The family barely has any savings, so such an enormous amount of resources could become an extremely important part of the game. Zhuo Yu then politely introduces herself to Waxing and asks the immortal masters to look after her from now on. Waxing readily agrees and says that he and his brothers can build a proper house for the three women while also preparing a place for Yao Kui. When night falls and the new guests have settled in, Waxing calls Changsheng over for conversation. Since they are cultivators and have many secrets, he considers it quite inconvenient to keep outsiders living inside the residence and asks why his brother made that decision. Changsheng explains that he is thinking about the future. To continue the bloodline, they need to travel around eliminating demons and ghosts, collect spirit crystals, and find spirits willing to perform spiritual union. The situation is even more complicated because the spirit of the Tai-Bai plane will fall into a sleep lasting around 100 years after a single union. That means the brothers will have to travel through different regions in search of other spirits. With only 3 members in the family, doing all of that will be practically impossible. Because of this, Changsheng believes they need to expand the Ren family, not necessarily through descendants, but by gathering subordinates and trustworthy people. These allies could act as eyes and ears spread across different regions, collecting information about demons, spirits, and important events. That way, the brothers would not have to wander aimlessly trying to figure out where each target could be found. Waxing reminds him that the 3 of them cannot have children normally and asks how exactly the family is supposed to prosper. Changsheng explains that this does not prevent the organization itself from growing. The world outside is engulfed in war and disaster, while the Ren residents can serve as a genuine refuge. They can take in talented people, offer them protection, and turn them into subordinates. To Changsheng, that also counts as strengthening the family. He even asks whether that was not exactly why Waxing agreed to bring Xiao Kui back. Not particularly willing to admit that this was not really the case, Waxing says yes. Changsheng becomes excited by the idea and starts thinking even further ahead. His only regret is that the family cannot take control of some political regime. With the power of cultivators, they could support a faction, accelerate the unification of the land, and perhaps even... Before he can finish the sentence, Changsheng is struck by a powerful reaction from his own bloodline. His body stiffens, he clutches his chest and drops to his knees in front of his brother. Waxing immediately becomes alarmed and asks what happened. After recovering slightly, Changsheng explains that he is fine. The restrictions left by Emperor Guangwu have simply tightened. Even though Guangwu's direct bloodline has apparently already disappeared, and the family no longer needs to specifically protect the Han dynasty, directly involving themselves in the struggle for political power remains forbidden territory. Merely imagining taking control of a regime for themselves was enough to trigger the curse. Changsheng decides to drop the subject and moves on to a more important piece of information he obtained through the new people the family has taken in. Many evil demons are currently roaming the region below Hulao Pass. In fact, those that entered the Tai-Bai plain represent only a small fraction of the creatures gathered in that area. He says, this is a great opportunity because if the Ren family can exterminate the demons at Hulao Pass, they will probably gather enough spirit crystals to return to the spirit of the Tai-Bai plain, perform the spiritual union, and finally take the first step toward ensuring the continuation of the bloodline. As the seasons pass, the Ren family begins to grow rapidly. By the winter of 191, in addition to the 3 brothers, the residence already houses 28 people, including Xiao Kui, Zhuo Yu, her maids, and several ordinary people the brothers rescued during expeditions. Ren Suo soon realizes that increasing the population does more than simply fill the house. The more residents there are, the larger the cultivable farmland can become, and the greater the chance of special professions emerging, such as doctors, tailors, blacksmiths, hunters, and miners. In addition, the game itself explains that most cultivators do not like living in complete isolation, and that the presence of mortals around them serves as a kind of confirmation that the path they follow is the correct one. In practical terms, this means the residents directly increase the cultivation speed of the Ren family members. The game also already provides different bonuses for the 3 brothers, and Fai Fan stands out the most. Since Xiao Kui arrived, his cultivation speed has received a considerable boost, and at this point, he already possesses the highest combat power in the family. Ren also notices that among the 6 available attributes, management is the most unusual of them all. The more residents join the family, the higher this attribute can grow, increasing the amount of food, gold, and silver produced each season while also unlocking special events. At one point, Changsheng's management reaches the required level and triggers one of these events. One of the residents finds an enormous spirit crystal in the mountains, and decides to offer it to the Ren family. Ren Suo is impressed to discover that wild spirit crystals are extremely rare. An ordinary ghost soldier usually yields only 1 to 10 portions, while a ghost general can drop between 10 and 50. But this single stone found by the resident is worth 100 portions all at once. To put that into perspective, the three brothers needed to spend an entire season fighting demonic soldiers at Hulao Pass to obtain roughly that amount. During the previous 3 seasons, Rensuo had been alternating the family's plans, having the brothers cultivate for 1 season and then splitting them into teams to fight the enemies at Hulao. However, during one of those battles, Feifan encounters a great ghost with 3 points in attack and 3 in defense, while he has only 1 point in each attribute. The result is a crushing defeat. Feifan is struck during the battle and suffers severe injuries, leaving him unable to continue fighting. But instead of dying, his character sheet simply changes to show that his maximum lifespan has dropped to 22 years. Changsheng explains that this happens because of the Fortify Heart spell, a technique naturally possessed by every bearer of the champion bloodline. Whenever they receive a fatal blow, the spell activates automatically and preserves their lives, allowing them to recover enough to move again after some time. The problem is that this protection is not free. Every time the Fortify Heart spell activates, it directly consumes the user's lifespan. Ren Suo then understands that the game's management strategy requires at least 2 main pillars. Someone needs strong management to sustain the family and its resources, while another person needs to accumulate enough combat power to protect everyone during expeditions. If those 2 roles are properly developed, even if one family member suffers a defeat, the entire structure of the family will not collapse. By the end of autumn, after another expedition, the family's accumulated spirit crystals finally exceed 300 portions. With the required amount in hand, Woxing and his brothers return to the earth spirit of the Tai Bai Plain and announce that they have gathered the payment she demanded. The interface immediately opens the spiritual union option, displaying the spirit of the Tai Bai Plain and her earth-related attribute. Ren Suo looks at it and thinks the system has practically put a price tag on the whole situation. Feifan immediately tries to escape the responsibility, saying that he is still far too young, but Changsheng argues that the 3 of them are the first generation of cultivators in the Ren family, and that the first descendant of the second generation should belong to the direct line of the current family head. Therefore, Ren Woxing is the most suitable choice to go first. With no other option, Ren Suo selects Woxing to perform the spiritual union. The Earth Spirit agrees and says that she hopes that when she awakens again, she will still be able to see her descendants and the descendants of the others. Ren Suo becomes excited, expecting to finally see how the mechanic works, but the moment the union begins, an explosion of light completely covers the screen. He even shouts at the sudden flash, only to realize that the game showed absolutely nothing. The interface informs him that the family head will need to spend an entire season performing the spiritual union and conceiving the descendant, so Changsheng temporarily takes over management of the household. The following spring, the cry of a baby finally echoes through the residence. Feifan looks at the child and comments that she resembles his older brother, but soon notices that Woxing has returned looking extremely pale and asks whether he is sick. Changsheng celebrates because the Ren family finally has a new generation and asks what the child will be named. Woxing explains that the girl was born from his spiritual union with the spirit of the Tai Bai Plain, and that the process also consumed a considerable amount of his vital essence, so he will need to spend the next season recovering. Ren Suo expects a screen to appear allowing him to choose the name and had even prepared one already, but the game simply ignores the player. Woxing decides on his own that because the girl was born in winter, she will be called Ren Xiaobai. Ren is outraged, unable to understand what winter has to do with Xiaobai, but admits that the game's talent for naming characters seems to be about on par with his own. The family genealogy is then updated, placing Ren Xiaobai beneath Woxing and confirming that the family officially has a second generation. The mission also becomes clearer. Ren must continue eliminating evil creatures, collecting spirit crystals, and keeping the Ren family bloodline alive until the year 266. Throughout that entire period, at least one direct descendant must remain alive. This makes Ren understand that reproduction and maintaining the family are truly the core of the game. To keep that cycle going, he will need to find new spirits. With that in mind, Ren decides to experiment with the scout attribute in his next strategy. After investing points into it, Woxing's reconnaissance ability increases considerably, and during a new expedition through the Hulao Pass region, he senses a mysterious aura coming from the northeast. Ren becomes excited when he sees that the choice actually worked and orders him to investigate. The newly revealed location is Lingbo Lake, where a beautiful blue-haired spirit surrounded by water asks for help. A great demon has begun roaming the area, and the spirit's cultivation is still insufficient to face it, so she asks the immortals to restore peace to the lake. At the same time, the map begins displaying more information. Newly discovered expedition points now receive difficulty descriptions, and Ren realizes that Scout does more than simply increase the chance of finding events on the map. It also reveals information about newly discovered locations. However, when he checks the new Spiritual Union option, he almost falls over. While the spirit of the Tai-Bai Plain remains asleep, the spirit of Lingbo Lake demands no fewer than 1,000 spirit crystals. Ren finds the price absurdly high, but at least he is finally beginning to understand the exact function of all 6 attributes. Attack determines offensive power. If attack exceeds an enemy's defense, the enemy can be defeated immediately. Otherwise, the attack reduces the opponent's defense by the corresponding difference. Defense, meanwhile, essentially functions as a cultivator's health during combat. As long as it does not reach 0, they remain fine and the value is restored at the end of the battle. Scout allows them to discover information about enemies and increases the frequency of encounters. Movement determines how many spaces a character can cross during a turn, and on the map, how far they can travel within a single season. Healing restores defense points during battles, can save members who are close to death, and also reduces losses among the residents. Management covers practically everything that happens outside of combat. After understanding these mechanics, Rensuo realizes that his opinion of the game is becoming better and better. Many of the locations infested with evil creatures coincide with historical battlefields where countless people died. During an expedition through Zhu Province, a region scarred by the massacre ordered by Cao Cao, the brothers receive a mission to eliminate a 6-armed corpse demon. The battle is intense, with the Ren brothers confronting the enormous creature among the ruins, but they manage to defeat it. After the battle, the loot includes 3 intact straight swords, 8 long spears, 1 superior quality longsword, 120 portions of gold and silver, and 250 spirit crystals. However, Feifan cannot simply celebrate the victory. Looking at the remains of the creatures, he realizes that many of those monsters had once been ordinary people before they died. Waxing explains that they were killed while carrying enormous resentment, and as the spiritual veins grew stronger, they eventually transformed. The family's inherited knowledge already explains the differences between those creatures. Demonic beasts are animals consumed by violence and bloodlust. Devils are corrupted humans. Ghosts are born from the resentment of the dead, while monsters are anomalies produced by spiritual energy. Feifan says he understands all of that, but he is still deeply troubled. Those people were simple peasants, just like Xiao Kui, living honestly through their own labor. He cannot accept that they were massacred so brutally and then condemned to continue suffering as creatures filled with resentment. Because of that, he asks why Cao Cao would do something like this. Waxing explains that massacres can spread terror among enemies and force them to surrender, while also allowing soldiers to release their pressure and Cao Cao to vent his own anger. Waxing also reminds him that Cao Cao's father was killed in Shu Province, and that the campaign was presented as a punitive expedition, motivated by filial piety. Feifan remains silent for a few moments, before asking whether, in the end, all of this can be blamed on Cao Cao. Waxing replies that, in a sense, yes. From the boy's reaction, Rensuo immediately realizes that something is about to go wrong. Not long afterward, the interface confirms his suspicions. Ren Feifan leaves the group on his own. With the family's only melee fighter gone, Rensuo becomes desperate. Feifan essentially served as the team's shield, and with the creatures becoming increasingly powerful, losing him makes future expeditions much more dangerous. Changsheng also has no idea where his brother went and can only ask the family head to continue deciding the plans for the following seasons. Sometime later, Feifan finally returns to the residence, calling out for his brothers. He looks physically completely different from before. Changsheng rushes over and asks how he ended up in such a state. Feifan reveals that he tried to assassinate Cao Cao and failed. Besides the fact that Cao Cao is surrounded by extraordinarily talented people with profound knowledge of spiritual energy, Feifan encountered an even stranger problem. Every time he was about to attack Cao Cao, his body simply froze. He tried 3 times and failed all 3. Changsheng immediately understands. The restrictions within the bloodline have reacted again, since that part of the curse had already been triggered before. Insisting on interfering in the same matter caused the restrictions to tighten even further, strengthening the champion bloodline at the cost of Feifan's own lifespan. Changsheng cannot understand why his brother went so far. After all, the Ren family does not even have a personal grudge against Cao Cao. Feifan admits that he cannot really explain it either. Whenever he closes his eyes, however, he sees the people massacred in Shu Province, gathering all that resentment and transforming into abominations that no longer seem human or ghostly. Rensuo watches the scene in silence and soon realizes the scale of the problem when he checks the character sheet. Feifan is now 18 years old and his maximum lifespan has also fallen to 18. Knowing that he has practically no time left, Feifan performs a spiritual union with the spirit of Lingbo Lake, consuming the required 1,000 spirit crystals to ensure that his branch of the bloodline continues as well. His descendant is born and Feifan decides to name her Ren Bu Hui, but his body has already reached its limit. Surrounded by his brothers and the people of the family, Feifan says that at least he managed to fulfill his mission and ensure the continuation of the Ren bloodline. Even so, he still finds the strength to complain that he never learned how to cook, and that during their travels, Waxing always had to prepare the food despite being a terrible cook. He then thanks Changsheng for all those years, acknowledging that his second brother was always there in the background, cleaning up the problems he caused. Feifan also knows that his attempt to assassinate Cao Cao may bring serious trouble to the family and regrets leaving that burden to his brothers. Before departing, he makes one final request to Changsheng, asking him to find a good husband for Xiao Kui someday. With his voice growing weaker, Feifan begins apologizing over and over. Waxing and Changsheng try to make him stop talking, but he already understands that there is no turning back. Feifan asks whether the two of them will remember him after he is gone. His brothers immediately answer that they will. Waxing promises that none of the three will ever be forgotten. Shortly afterward, the interface records that Ren Feifan died in the summer of 194 at the age of 18, leaving behind the final words that he was sorry for leaving too soon. Ren Suo panics immediately. Only then does he realize that he never saved the game and starts wondering how he can go back and stop that idiot from destroying his own lifespan trying to kill Cao Cao. However, when he opens the menu, he discovers something even worse. There is no normal save option. The current progress has already been recorded directly into the annals of history, and the system only offers the choice to continue from that point, restart the entire campaign, or abandon it for another game. Ren stares at the screen in disbelief, realizing that in this game, his mistakes and the autonomous decisions made by the characters can simply become a permanent part of history. Ren Suo decides to continue that playthrough a little longer to better understand how the game works, but the future of the Ren family begins growing increasingly complicated. In the summer of 195, Ren Waxing reaches the end of his life at the age of 23, leaving behind the final wish of going back to catch shrimp in the river with his brothers. After his death, Ren Chengsheng takes over as head of the family and begins using the name Ren Waxing. From that moment onward, every future head of the family would inherit that name as well. A few years later, in the autumn of 199, Changsheng, now the second Ren Waxing, also dies at the age of 23, declaring that he never regretted being born into the Ren family. Ren Xiaobai then inherits the leadership and becomes the third Ren Waxing. In the spring of 206, she performs a spiritual union with the White Horse Spirit Lord and gives birth to Ren Luo. However, in the summer of 209, another tragedy occurs. Ren Bu Hui dies at the age of 15 inside the Chibi Ghost Realm. Looking at the state of the family, Ren Suo realizes that this playthrough has practically no hope left. Cultivators of the Ren family can only begin cultivating at the age of 8 and can only enter combat or perform a spiritual union after turning 14. Before that, newborn descendants essentially serve only to increase the family population without contributing in any meaningful way. When the timeline reached the year 209, after the Battle of Chibi, Ren had sent Ren Bu Hui into the newly formed Chibi Ghost Realm to obtain more spirit crystals. At that point, only Ren Xiaobai and Ren Bu Hui were available as cultivators, but one of them was required to remain at the residence to manage the family. Because of that, Bu Hui had to leave alone. The problem was that Ren Suo could not directly control her because she was not the family head and therefore did not carry the name Ren Waxing. After sending her on the expedition, the only news that came back was confirmation of her death. Apparently, the demons in the Chibi Ghost Realm were far stronger than Bu Hui could handle, and she never even had a chance to escape. With that, only Ren Xiaobai and the young Ren Luo remain. Xiaobai is already 18 years old, and her maximum lifespan has fallen to 21, while Ren Luo is only 3. Ren Suo then realizes the true problem with progression. Even if Xiaobai can sustain the family for some time, once she dies, only Ren Luo will remain, and he will have to begin cultivation practically from scratch. Meanwhile, the demons of the Three Kingdoms era will continue growing stronger and stronger. If the new generation cannot defeat them, there will be no spirit crystals, and without those resources, it will be impossible to negotiate with spirits and produce new descendants. Since family members only have a fixed period between the ages of 8 and 23 to cultivate, every generational transition creates a dangerous phase in which the younger descendants fall far behind the enemies. A larger population can speed up cultivation somewhat, but it does not completely solve the problem. At this rate, the outcome is inevitable. The family declines and the bloodline is eventually severed. Even so, the attempt was not useless. Rensuo managed to discover two ways to keep the family's cultivators ahead of the demons across generations. The first is to find increasingly powerful spirits for spiritual union. The resulting children can not only be born with special traits, but also gain advantages in cultivation. Ren Xiaobai's own character sheet demonstrates this. Because she is a descendant of the earth spirit of the Taibai Plain, she possesses an earth vein spell and a special trait that causes her defense to increase alongside attack whenever she follows an offensive path. And the spirit of the Taibai Plain was still relatively weak. If Ren finds truly powerful spirits, their descendants could be born with even greater bonuses. The only problem is that stronger spirits demand equally larger amounts of spirit crystals, so the family must continue fighting demons to accumulate resources. The second solution Ren discovers is inheritance. This mechanic allows a family member to instantly consume all of their remaining lifespan to transfer part of their attributes to another member. Depending on the relationship and compatibility between the two, the successor receives between 25 and 50% of the sacrificed member's attributes. That is exactly what happened in the autumn of 199. Chiang Sheng, already 23 years old and close to death, passed his strength onto Ren Xiaobai, who was only 8 and had just reached the age required to begin cultivating. Xiaobai received 35% of his attributes. Chiang Sheng died shortly afterward, and she took over as head of the family, becoming the third Ren Waxing. To Ren, this is probably the most reliable and economical way to keep the family growing. If each generation passes its strength to the next before dying, the descendants will always start from a higher point and will be able to keep pace with the demon's growth. The problem is that the chain cannot be broken for even a single generation. To ensure that there is always a suitable successor ready to receive the inheritance, Ren returns to the game's central problem once again: the need to perform spiritual unions and produce descendants at the right time. And there is even more pressure to act quickly. As the demons grow stronger, they also begin attacking the spirits scattered across the map. In 203, for example, the Flaming Ghost army of Guandu exterminates the earth spirit of Liang. Therefore, simply discovering a spirit and leaving the negotiation for later is not enough. If Ren waits too long, the spirit may simply die before the family can gather the necessary crystals. After playing to that point, Ren finally feels that he understands almost the entire basic structure of the campaign. The places where demons appear are directly connected to major historical events from the Three Kingdoms period, especially locations where large numbers of people died. Hulao, Guandu, and Chibi have already appeared, and Ren knows that places like Zhaoyaojin, Hanzhong, and Jieting will still come later. Beyond wars, the game will probably also make use of major historical disasters such as locust plagues, snowstorms, and Yellow River floods. Ren still remembers the great epidemic of 217, when the Central Plains are expected to practically turn into one enormous ghost realm, guaranteeing an absurd number of monsters to fight. Now that he has figured out the main rules and made enough mistakes to understand the progression, he decides he is ready to restart the campaign and play for real. At that moment, however, his phone starts ringing. When he answers, Ren discovers that the caller is An Suyu, a member of the Special Crime Countermeasures Department. She officially informs him that he has been recruited and must report either that day or the next to the National Security Headquarters at 220 Deming Street, UXU District, Lianjiang. After that, he will officially begin working the following day. Ren tries to argue that he is still a university senior and that, under normal circumstances, he should only start working after June. But Suyu adds one piece of information that instantly changes his attitude. Lianjiang's cultivation facility has already been completed, and at the moment, only members of the Countermeasures Department are allowed to use it, with 1 hour of access per day. Ren immediately drops all complaints and says he will report that very afternoon. Since he needs to go out, he decides to prepare his equipped abilities more carefully. Ren keeps Cloak as his primary ability and basic combat in reserve, while Infinite Energy, Sweet Dreams, and Lock remain outside the active slots. But while adjusting the interface, he notices something he had never seen before. The game characters have a second equipment page. When he opens Ren Waxing's character sheet, he discovers that abilities obtained outside that campaign, including Infinite Energy, Sweet Dreams, Basic Combat, Cloak, and Lock, are also available to equip on him. Ren becomes excited when he realizes just how great an advantage this could provide, and decides that as soon as he finishes dealing with matters outside, he will return and crush the game's stages using this new discovery. Later, Ren arrives on the 3rd floor of the National Security Headquarters. Suyu leads him to the Countermeasures Department area and informs him that from that moment onward he will be part of Team 3. His uniform and identification are with the team captain, Jilong. When they find the captain, Suyu tells him that she has brought one of the rookies assigned to his team. Jilong is surprised to learn that he only received two, complaining that he constantly says during meetings that he is short on manpower and that Lianjiang gathered more than 100 candidates. Suyu sarcastically asks whether he also wants to recruit those who have not even officially entered the path of cultivation yet, and the captain insists that he really does need more people. After introducing Jilong as Ren's superior, Suyu leaves Ren in his care. The captain tells the rookie to come closer and begins searching through the mess on his desk for the employment documents. When he finally finds them, he hands everything to Ren to review and says that if there are no problems, he only needs to sign. Ren is immediately pleased with the package. There is no probationary period, and the position is permanent from the start with a base salary of 6,000 yuan. Once meal, dinner, housing, and other allowances are included, his monthly income easily reaches 5 figures. The government also fully covers employment benefits, and after 3 years on the job, employees can apply for an interest-free loan to purchase property with a limit of up to 5 million. Ren finishes reading but notices that there is no mention of the cultivation facility and asks the captain about it. Jilong then remembers that the contract was drafted 2 months earlier, when the cultivation center did not even exist yet. Access is handled through their work identification. While searching for Ren's card, Jilong eventually finds it among his belongings and hands it over, warning him not to lose it because a replacement costs 65 yuan. The cultivation center is near West Yiwu Street and operates out of the city's former sports center, so Ren can simply use the map to get there. As he examines his new identification, Ren realizes that it carries far more weight than an ordinary employee badge. The document establishes one very clear obligation and one very clear right. The holder must provide assistance whenever a citizen of the Xuan Kingdom asks for help, but also has the authority to request cooperation from citizens and organizations during operations, with any resulting losses covered by national security. Those two clauses alone make Ren understand the level of authority and responsibility involved in the job. Jilong asks whether he truly understands what he is getting into, because not just anyone can enter the countermeasures department, much less that particular team. Ren admits that he is also a little confused and asks why exactly he was selected. The captain explains that based on the overall assessment conducted earlier, national security calculated that Ren should already have managed to stabilize his chi vortex. At the moment, that is practically the only real requirement for joining the department, being a cultivator. They are short on manpower, while at the same time the work is too dangerous for ordinary people. Only someone with a fully formed chi vortex has the minimum ability to protect themselves during missions. Jilong also mentions that the other members of the team are all out at the moment, taking part in the search for the so-called goddess. Ren immediately asks whether he means the woman from the video, "If you are strong, climb 10,000 meters," and the captain confirms it. One detail that most people overlooked was that when she expressed her thanks in the Xuan language during the climb, her pronunciation clearly carried a Lianjiang province accent. Because of that, the department spent several days searching the region for clues about her. Even so, they found nothing, and the operation will probably be called off that very day. Jilong then points out which desk will belong to Ren and tells him to follow along so they can pick up his uniform, since he will need to clock in at 9 the next morning. But before they can leave, Suyu appears again and tells the captain that another rookie assigned to the team has arrived. Looking toward the door, Ren is surprised to recognize Chao Muyi. She greets Jilong and recognizes Ren as well, cheerfully commenting that the two of them will now be co-workers. Jilong thinks her timing is perfect because he still needs to test both of them. Ren and Xiao repeat the word test, not quite understanding what he intends to do, but the captain does not explain and in the next instant unexpectedly places his hands on both of their shoulders. Ren feels half of his body beginning to go numb and realizes that if it continues, he will soon lose control over his movements. As soon as Jilong stops the technique, he says, "That is enough." Both of them learned cloak well and are capable of handling the team's everyday missions. Ren finally understands the test. The captain had used lock directly on them, forcing both of them to react with cloak. Satisfied with the result, Jilong tells the rookies to pick up their uniforms and come back afterward to finish their contracts. As he walks away with his hands trembling, he thinks that these rookies are tougher than he expected. Ren, on the other hand, can only be thankful that he equipped cloak before leaving home. If he had arrived there unprepared and been caught off guard by that lock, he probably would have embarrassed himself badly on his very first day. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new content. Thank you.